Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter. Our guest for this one is Skriv, who is a commentator you will have heard on many different platforms. Obviously, he has his own podcast that he does semi-infrequently at this point in time. Was it called The Off Angle or something like that, right?
Yeah, not done one for a while, to be fair. We sort of hung it up a little bit, I suppose. But, time's opening back up, circuit's getting busier, so it might be back up in future, for sure.
Okay.
Get the boys back together.
Yes. Okay, right. Let's just dive right into it. So obviously we always start with the guest's good point. So Skriv, what is the good point this week?
So I'm going with the Eternal Fire performances, I think, right? They have been stepping up their game in my mind. They qualify for Rio in a really, really decisive qualifier, and it was pretty stacked, a fair number of teams that they really had to kind of challenge themselves with, a few teams that they've not got as much experience against, right? Cloud9 and Falcons. Now, I think for the first day of that qualifier, they also went through barely dropping any rounds, really, really decisive stuff from them. Bet Boom Datcher came second there. I feel like that's maybe flown under the radar ever so slightly because Spirit are back in form and, winning an event, right? But yeah, and I like the way that Eternal Fire are looking at the moment. As of time of recording, they've made the playoff of Pro League and everything. So I feel like this team are in a really, really good spot at the moment. It seems like they're adding a bit more to their game as well. For a while, as Turkish Counter-Strike's just all sort of firepower and passion, sort of one of those kind of rosters. But recently, it feels they've been adding a little bit more structure in. They've been looking at a few of the more sideways results, like Cologne, for example, where I'm sure they would have wanted to at least make it through into that group stage. And ultimately, they look like a much better version of themselves. And I think that, there's been a lot more work for this team. And it's paying off online for sure. And then in some of these easier environments, they now just, I think, have to step that level up into the stages, into, the prestige events and things like that. Maybe a little bit of nerves to get over for a few of the players.
Eternal Fire, I mean, I'm not sure if I would have made them necessarily like a good point because it was like they hit that early peak this year with the major making top 8, and then they sort of fell off. In my eyes, they sort of tapered off in performances, with the exception of the CCT Global Finals where they beat Liquid in the Grand Finals there, which again was online. And in LAN matches, I feel like they've had a couple disappointing results here and there. That being said, I feel like one thing I like about Eternal Fire when I do watch them is that I kind of actually feel like I understand their map pool. Like, it doesn't feel like it's just some random, okay, we're just gonna kind of randomly be good some days and not and other days because of purely Xantares doing well. Like, I actually think this team got a new kind of lease on life where after the sort of major drop off, once Dust 2 re-entered the pool for Overpass, one of their worst maps they just brought it. Valve just gave them a new good map. So that's a huge boon to them. When I watch them, I've always liked their Vertigo in terms of I feel like they have a lot of good protocols on it overall. I feel like they're Anubis when I watched them yesterday versus Navi, how they took it to double overtime. Sure, they lost, but a lot of good ideas, and they don't overcomplicate things. I don't actually generally feel like MIBR is showing. He's not like. It's almost like this. He's like the Turkish snacks. Like, it's simple calling, but it works with the teammates that he's got. It's not like I'm not getting my mind blown with anything that they're doing too often, but I'm generally like, okay, like, you're not overcooking, like, which is a problem with in-game leaders when they're just less comfortable with the pieces. But because the roster has been around for, I think, over a year now, actually, as a 5-man unit, they definitely know what they're capable of, not capable of. They have a little bit of X factor in some of the players, like Calyx to me is kind of the X factor guy. Xantares is just a really stable, great, strong entry force. Woxic has kind of become a map specialist for me, which is why they're good at Dust 2, because he's so good at Dust 2. But then MIBR himself, I think he maybe likes maps like Nuke, for example. But for whatever reason, I just don't know if they're always the best on all of the maps. Like, I can't really get like a great, and Wycadia, for example, is really good on Vertigo from what I've seen. So I'm not sure if the stats back all those statements up, but it's just how I feel when I'm watching them. And I just think that when it comes to Eternal Fire, like, I just don't know, like, are they gonna be a lot better? Are they possibly gonna make a deep run? Because top 8 at the major seems like a best case scenario for this team, because I don't really see any individual player, with the exception of Woxic, now that Dust 2 is in the pool, leveling up in any degree.
Yeah, I will say the most obvious player that did look way better in the last like month to 2 months is obviously Woxic. If people saw when this team was like cooking earlier this year, like Maui was saying, actually Woxic was more just sort of someone where like maybe he win like the odd 1v2 or something, but he wasn't having very dominant op performances. And I actually thought like he was only like a one-side player at that point in time. Like that team was just a Zantares show, and then Wikedi was like a rookie one, and everyone's got like, oh, maybe the heights are going up. Whereas actually, to me, Wikedi is the one who sort of stagnated. Like he didn't keep the line going up on the trajectory, but Woxic sort of regained some of the CSGO form. If people don't know, he's never actually like called me out, so there's never been a reason I'm going to reveal what he did in Cloud9. But basically, here's all you need to know. He just was like a bit unprofessional and sort of showed that when it was only online play, it's not like some like meme of like, I only care about LAN bro. Like he genuinely didn't give a flying fuck. He was basically just phoning in his job when it was the online era. And so sadly, if people remember right before the online era when he was in Mouse, he was mega. That was when he was like a top 10 player on HLTV. I think he was like 9th or something like that year, or 11th or so. He was quite high up on the list. He was a mega impact player, if everyone remembers. He wasn't just like AWPing. He was like winning 1v5s and shit like that on LAN against like top teams. So actually some of that has come back. Like this is like Bet Boom Dacha tournament. He won a bunch of massive clutches and had loads of, he actually had halves where he just took over. Funnily enough, it's amazing they made that second place run in that tournament, because actually that's one of the only times they weren't mega carried by Zantares. He even had some like quite quiet games at times, because my problem with this team for most of this year was it just looked like you had Zantares and he's doing like the tabs in big the last few years, where it's like, bro, you probably should just be in a better team, but you're like opting to choose to stay with these guys for like, instead of friendship reasons, for nationality reasons, isn't it? You want to be in an all Turkish team and live the super team dream and all that jazz. So to me, the reason I can't get that hyped about it, it's the same thing as Elysian Call, is when you've got one guy carrying like that and he's sort of like overqualified. The problem is if he ever leaves, you just fuck that, you've got nothing left. Whereas actually they would have something if he left. If they left, they wouldn't be like a top team. But like actually Woxic looks pretty good at the moment. Madja has the odd performance that aren't too bad. I also agree on the map pool. The main problem they have is this, it's why they don't get as many upsets as you probably hope, is the maps that they try to be amazing on are obviously like Anubis and Vertigo, right? But they're not actually the team where it's like, you know, like 9 a while back used to be godlike on Vertigo. It's not like that. It's not like you auto lose because they pick it. Like they still sometimes lose themselves on these maps if they're playing like a Mouse or a Spirit or something like that. So it's not, that's the only downside, is they're not one of those teams where, even actually, if you remember when Sword did this recent run, if they got nuke against people, they had a real chance to win, even if it was like one of the best teams. They maybe don't have that upset, but I will agree, this last month or so has been a massive uptick for this team. They look way better than they did before that. So, yeah, I think it's pretty, I mean, if people don't know, they obviously were absolutely fucking non-existent at Cologne. They would just be irrelevant at that point in time. So, I do think it's a big uptick. I still think the sad thing for me, though, is I don't know how much more there is to like improve, because like I said at the beginning, I sort of put a lot of my hopes on Wikidia to get better, to give them like the extra firepower, and then they could sort of win some things. Because I do feel like, for me, I understand why, but I do think Zantares is too good for this team. Like, to me, I just think there's so many teams where I could just slot him in. I mean, I'd even say right now, especially in CS2, isn't like the easiest player to put in a team, an aggressive rifler who uses the AK. Like, that's pretty much what every team's like asking for Christmas. Like, you think of all the teams that want the play. I mean, before Immer, you'd have said Navi, you'd have said Complexity. There's a million teams want those players. So it's more just like, I enjoy this team for like novelty value, and to see actually more like how good is the top team that's facing them. But no, fair enough. They definitely, you can't complain about the last month or so. They have been cooking, Skriv. Pretty good.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a level of where we have these sort of gatekeeper teams. Maybe they're not going to get above that, you know what I mean? But at the same time, they're fending off, like I say, in this qualifier and everything, a fair amount of big names, and pretty cleanly. I think they have their environment. They have their spots where they are comfortable. And one of the key things that, you know, I'm kind of looking at and considering is that they're playing in that sort of LAN boot campy environment, whatever you want to call it. They were playing the qualifier while they were also playing Bet Boom Batcher and stuff like this. So it was a weird sort of environment for them to perform in. First game out at Bet Boom Datcher against Mouse, they didn't win, but from there, once they maybe got the qualifier like out of the way and out of their system and dealing with fatigue or whatever, they turned it up a bit. So I think that if they can use these sort of, I think there'll be a menace like into next year's calendar with, you know, sort of your Sky Esports events, and there's like this Fissure event going on, Bet Boom Datcher events or whatever, you'll assume will be back in some kind of capacity. So I think they could be a real menace there. And yeah, I also agree on the Wikidia point that it feels like he's a lot of the reason this team's kind of taken an uptick, because there hasn't been talent for a long time. What have you got in your mind? You got like xCloud and Jota, who are currently on Sangal and everything. Like, where else do you really go within the Turkish scene? There's not much to go on. So I think they're maybe looking at having like young talent and whatnot as a reason to really get their heads in the game. It feels like whenever we speak to Madja, wherever it may be, he's always got a really sound head. There's obviously the episode of Talking Counter, I think, that was really popular at one point, and all that. So I feel like they have the pieces to maybe push in. For a top 8, I think they could make a Saw-like run at certain events. Whether they'll hit a super consistent streak is obviously the big question. But this is a team as well that, like, yes, you might look down the years and whatnot that players have been on the team. A fair amount of them have been in and out, actually, of this project. Zantara is obviously the longest standing member, but Madge has been in and out, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm pretty sure Woxic was in to begin with and then wasn't, and then back. They really tried recycling sort of the talent around for a bit, and this is the longest as, someone who's been in Tier 2 and sort of seen this team come up, as it were, even though they were well-known names. This is the longest that they've been together as a solid roster. And I think that kind of just paints the picture of how confident they're feeling in the project. So yeah, there's maybe a ceiling of where they can go, but I like the way that they test kind of the higher teams. They might pull off a few upsets, but it is quite easy to just sort of look down where the results are at recently. And every time they hit sort of a brick wall kind of team, they do tend to falter. Maybe they'll bring a map close. Maybe they'll take one. The only one that sort of stands out at the moment is they beat Maus to get into that final of Bet Boom Dacha. So I think that there is a little bit there for them to work with. Unfortunately, the final was kind of neither here nor there. They just got rinsed in 3. So a very fun sort of team to watch for me, and I think that there is potential here. It just maybe needs another player like Wicadia to sort of come out of the woodwork, and you'd assume replace like a Calix, or maybe they have an AWPer that, yes, Woxic has some good moments, but they might need a bit more consistency. There's still a little bit missing. But when you look across like other teams that exist within their position, I think that they can certainly test, your complexities, your Mongols of the world. But teams like VP, I'm thinking that were always sort of the gatekeeper teams, maybe Heroic or whatever. Eternal Fire have definitely taken on that mantle for me in terms of like testing those bigger teams. And when you are another team that's on the come up that's trying to make deep runs in tournaments, Eternal Fire will be someone that actually sort of humble you or knock you down into a lower bracket or even out of the tournament, So I do feel like this team just has that sort of level to it where they can really be difficult to get through. They just need to like break through their ceiling, and that's maybe where the question mark is for me, right? Can they actually do that? Or is this as good as it gets? Do we keep sort of ebbing and flowing at this sort of level?
I will also say as well, people probably do underestimate, because I notice people do this thing where they're just like writing off the entire Bet Boom events. I mean, I assume you're just massive Zemu fans or something, right? You're like, why are we pretending these events aren't real? Like, we're counting, by the way, we count shite like blast groups, which is after every fucking player break, where there's brand new rosters and like the results almost, you just put a fucking bunch of names in a hat and pick them out. It doesn't even matter. It has no relevance even on the bloody finals, because the finals like 2 months later. So if we're going to fucking count shit like that, Bet Boom Dacha counts. Like Maus and Spirit are real teams. And by the way, if anyone thinks like, oh, who cares, you only beat Maus, go look who's beat Maus. Fucking almost no one. Basically everyone who beats Maus wins fucking lands, boys. Like, they don't drop series randomly. So even though I'm with you, like, you didn't do anything aside from that, that one result is fucking legit. Like, you don't trip over and beat Maus spots. Not now. Right, do you want to go to your point, Maui?
Yeah, sure.
By the way, where is this point? I haven't seen this. Is it a rumor or something?
Yeah, it was a Note published an article
right
a while back. Let me see when it was published, just to be sure about it. But basically, it says MIBR is in advanced talks with Lucaozy. This came out 5 days ago. So this is my good point, essentially. It's that Lucaozy has been stuck on Fluxo for a couple of years now, and despite the fact that they made it to the Paris Major and they went 0-3 in that Paris Major, kind of fluking their way through the RMR, by the way. I think they got to play a team like Case or like Paqueta or something like that. Like, they got a really easy draw at the RMR just by virtue of the Swiss system just kind of fucking around, honestly, and just putting him there. Lucaozy has been obviously the best player on Fluxo for the last couple of years. Zevi's had his moments here and there, but overall, This team's kind of a disaster for me. They didn't even make it to the RMR this time around. They have Art, they have Kai. I think people know how I feel about both of those players, and so I'm not going to really delve into it, but Lucaozy's just being completely hamstrung for one of the brightest aggressive rifle talents in Brazil. Not only is he now kind of having to shift roles because Art is now on Fluxo, who wants to obviously run in himself. I feel like Lucaozy's had to actually develop his game a little bit, and I'm glad that MIBR. I think people this might look kind of bad because MIBR just beat Spirit in a BO3 at ESL Pro League, but this is a good move. This is just flat out a good move. The roles, people say, and for anybody that's thinking, oh, what about the roles? Doesn't he play Insani's roles? There is overlap, but what they want to do on T side is similar. But Lucaozy's had to kind of reel himself in because Art's the one that wants to run forward. And so now he's actually kind of developed that side of his game a little bit. And on top of that, he's still performing very well now that Art's running in first before him. So it's not like he can't just go in second. Like, that's not hard. I feel like people are like, but they do similar things. They both want to run in first. It's like, yes, but like you, with the lone exception in the last couple years of say like when Elige played with Yakindar and started having to run in second, you don't usually see someone complaining about having to run in second. That's not usually a bad thing. You usually like that. And on top of that, I feel like the replacement is actually pretty obvious. BR Enizan has been the worst player for MIBR for my money, and there is a good amount of role overlap for CT spots. So even though people, you know, like you might just your head might click and say like, but they're going to play similar roles. BR Enizan is basically playing the opposite sort of rotator role that Lucaozy wants to play on 4 of the maps. So they play the same spots on Cave on Ancient. They both play mid on Dust 2. They play Cat or Short on Mirage. They play the A anchor. They both play A anchor on Vertigo. And then that's when the overlaps begin on the other couple maps where Lucaozy does play the same spots as Itasani. But it's like, if you have to just choose, if you have to switch up 2 spots for Lucaozy because you don't want overlap with Insani, I think you're going to take that. And I also think that this is just such a great move because it's just getting your worst player out, the best player of another team in your region in. And the thing is that MIBR, I've actually considered it a couple times lately to have MIBR as my bad or even my ugly point on this podcast, because for all the talk we've had about complexity, for the fact that, oh, the roster's been around for a year, oh, they're not really doing anything with it. This team, MIBR, has been around, like, they've had Drop and Safe, the 2 newest additions to their team, for a year and 2 months. Like, they've been together. Yeah. They've been together for a damn long time, and they really have not done anything. So, like, this is a move that I think is going to really benefit them. I don't even mind if they really do this. I get why you wouldn't want to do this before the RMR, because you want to just stick with the core that just beat Spirit and hopefully just get yourself a spot into the major and get that sticker money. But even if they actually decided, you know what, we're going to pull the plug, I would have been okay with it. That being said, I think roster locks might be happening already, so I'm not sure about the details of that. But either way, the fact that advanced discussions are happening, I think this is a good move for MIBR, because for my money, you don't need to keep trying out BR Enizan. He's just not really there quite yet. And also for Lucaozy, I think he just needs a better team at this point.
Yeah, I'm always curious with the South American region, like around, you know, it'd be really cool to get some information on like where contracts are at, where like movements go in and whatnot with these types of things, because it feels like everything within, for the most part, within like, you know, maybe the equivalent, which would be like tier 2 Europe, where there's a lot more movement. And in South America, there's not as much, you know, and I feel like a lot of these players want to play with people that either they enjoy playing with or that they think will like lift their game in sort of like Lucaozy's way, where you've got like a few players on this team that have played a little bit higher up on the Fluxo roster, right? Art's the obvious one, and then Kai, say what you will, but there's going to be sort of people behind him having played on Furia and whatnot, even if it was very, very briefly. So I think it's always like really weird. They make a few sort of interesting decisions, maybe unwise decisions around like not moving up to a better team. It always feels like the talent is there, but getting it all in the right place at the right time is just almost impossible, you know, like even within Furia and everything, they still make moves that people don't really agree with on like the international scene. So I always find it's like a really curious region in that sense. And then you also have all these players that it's its own kind of ecosystem, you know, you can sort of coax through, do okay regionally, nationally, and still make like a living and all this sort of stuff as well. So you don't necessarily have to be aiming big, as it were, and it almost feels like you're still finding success because they're able to find success within the region. So I don't know, man. It's like you figure that MIBR would have made changes by now. You figure that Lucaozy would have been moved up to a slightly better team, but they probably believe on Fluxo that they are the better team. You know, like the psychology of it all is really, I think curious is like a nice way of putting it. Maybe sometimes a bit foolish in a sense, but that's always the thing for me, that you see these players and they don't really go anywhere. And then it's like, okay, Lucaozy's got all this talent, but he's moving up maybe a little bit too late, or he goes into a team where it's not quite going to work, or the vibes are already off, or they're already on kind of a downturn, you know, or whatever it may be. So I always like hold my breath with moves like that, because it should work, it should be good, but we've had a good number of them in the past where they just don't work out, or then when they do get moved up to something a little bit different, like in the case of Safe, it just never pans out, you know. And I think people really haven't learned their lessons in the sort of South American, and particularly in the Brazilian scene, I guess, now with like a Mobs move, with the crew team looking pretty good out of Argentina. It's a bit more sort of South American, but yeah, I don't know if you guys sort of have a take on that, where like the logic behind some of the moves and the players and the contract hell or whatever it may be is always weird to watch from the outside.
I mean, I'll take it from that angle, actually, which is, I'll set it up this way. The reason why, it's not even just this move, this actually makes me hyped for MIBR, the team. And the reason why is what you were referring to before. It's a mixture of what you were talking about, what Maui was saying. So as Maui said, this isn't a team where like they just made this squad 2 weeks ago. They've added this player, like, will it work? It's like they've actually had this core for ages, guys. I mean, I always tell people, because they had that fucking Blast group spot, whenever you used to watch Blast, I can tell who doesn't watch the whole broadcast. Like, you've seen this team actually play way more games than you think, like, because they were automatically in every Blast groups because they had the partner spot. And when I watched this team, it's one of the reasons why on this show I've been banging on for like a year about the Insanity guy. It's like, he's just obviously a talent. If he checks out on the eye test immediately, and then the rest of the team, well, it was never bad, believe it or not. I'll never say they were a good team. They never should have been like a top 15 team of the world or anything. If they ever had that ranking, it was like a mixture of like formula weirdness, or I don't know, they had like a ESL Challenger event they did a run in or something that I don't care about. But if you ever watch the team, they weren't bad is the key thing. Like, some of the players they got were good. So actually, I'll refer to what you're talking about now, Skriv, which is, that's the part that doesn't make sense if you're an outsider, because there's two angles, right? You think either of the old days of CS where like contracts weren't a big deal. And in fact, back in the day, the reason why even when contracts did exist in games like CS 1.6, you could always get the player you wanted, is it didn't really exist as a contract. No one was ever going to take you to court if you had that player play for you next week in your New Jersey. So as a result, it was more just like almost out of politeness. You said he had a contract and you asked, can we sign him? And then that's why you could always get the deal very cheap. Like it might be a few thousand to sign the player. Whereas the problem I've heard now is it's a mixture of, supposedly in sports, literally football, this was what changed everything in Brazilian sports basically, was because all the European teams came and got the Ronaldo Nazarios and all these players from Brazil. They used to bring over, it actually used to come to like European teams, and they'd always, and what people don't know is the first signing when you got them from the Brazilian team would usually be very cheap, because obviously they're a nobody and they have no leverage, and they all want to go to the European team, they want to be big. And so the problem essentially, as far as I know back in the day, was when you're like the team, like I think it was PSV that had Ronaldo, then sold him to Barcelona, you make fuck tons. You can make like 20 million, or maybe back in the day it was 5 million or something. But the team in Brazil's always like, well, we didn't get anything though. Like, he was our talent, we grew. And so the problem is, I'm not enough an expert to know about Brazilian football, but people told me what they did is they somehow changed the way they set their contracts up. And essentially you have to sort of buy them for much more healthy fee in the first place now to sort of protect the homegrown talent. And the reason I bring this up is because in the modern day, it feels like in Counter-Strike and esports, it's gone way too far the other way. Because here's the mad thing, a lot you might not realize if you haven't kept track of the stories. It's not just what people think. So think about that story that Maui was melding about for the last 9 months about skulls into Team Liquid, right? Where you hear like, what the fuck, 600,000 for that player. It's worse than that, guys. Remember, they sold Fallen from Imperial in Brazil to Furia in Brazil for 700,000. Fallen in like 2023 or something, like, what? And then if you want another one that people forget about is, do you remember way back in the day where the Cloud9 team that won the major lost at WESG to Team 1, and that guy, fucking, what was his name? TRK, who later played in MIBR, he carried, and everyone supposedly in Brazil was like, oh, maybe it's time for him to go to a top team. He took something like 2 years to get to like MIBR, because they were also saying to them, like, infinity buyout, and then they would be like, what he only did one LAN. And so as far as I know, there's a weird angle, which is one, it's incredibly expensive to get these players for some reason. So essentially, to tie it back to the MIBR thing, that's actually why they've got some pretty good players. And at the end of this rant, I'm going to say that I think they're already an IGL away from actually being a pretty good team, not even just a decent team, a pretty good team, because they've sort of been able to, as you say, keep all the good pieces. They actually haven't let anyone good go from MIBR. It's actually really crazy. Whereas I can tell you in Europe, bro, even like Mouse, if Mouse could do what MIBR did, they'd have Frozen right now. They might even still have Rops right now. You know what I mean? They could have actually the best team in the world. But even Mouse know you've probably got this next season with this lineup. And then, if you're unlucky, Impact goes to Vitality and fucking Xertion goes to Faze. And then you bite right back at Square. Not one, but 1.5 or something, Whereas in Brazil, bizarre, it doesn't happen. And then secondly, the other point you were pointing out is, this is bizarre because you'd think, right, well, it's just business then, isn't it? It's a bunch of people in boardrooms not letting players go to teams. It's even worse than that, because then there's a really weird old school vibe, which is like you say, people just want to play with their friends or something. Like, people get the angle that K Serato just wants to play with Brazilians, right? I will say, we are all a bit hypocritical. We can't all go, and I don't. Tabson, it's all right for you to stay big, mate. German CS needs you. Oh, Zantares, of course you should play in Eternal Fire, mate. What are they going to do without you? K Serato, you bloody idiot, leave the team, you cretin. What are we doing? Those three teams, by the way, guys, he has the best chance to win the major and always will do. So I will say, we got to figure that fucking double standard out, because if Tabson's allowed to stay, I'm sorry, so's K Serato. That's why, if you notice, now that I know he's never bloody leaving, I've changed my attack. I don't whine about K Serato not leaving. I whine about Fury and not signing straight fire players like MIBR players to his team, so you can just have the best Brazilian team. So there's that angle. But I'll give you the example I heard recently. I actually did reach out to Big Azera from Pain and just say to him, come on, mate, you will surely have offers from European teams or better Brazilian teams. And he basically said, yeah, I do, but I just don't take them, lol. And I was like, well, you know what? I can't really say anything to that, can I? If he chooses not to take the offers and he's even dropping a lol on me, then I feel like I'm pretty much shit out of luck, aren't I? So, what can I do with that? He's hit me with the double whammy there. He's got the lol and he's not doing the best thing for his career. But I just think at this point, there's something about Brazilians where, in a weird way, I'll relate this to my experience with them. How to me, you'd think they're my main enemy and I must hate them, right? They're not. They're just really complicated, which is when they think you're against them, they hate you on some old, tribal angle of fuck you, you're the outsider, we're the in-group. But what's mad is, if they like you, when they have a drink with you at an event or something, they bring you into the group and then they're really lovely to you and really warm. So I think for some weird reason, more than other teams, they just have a thing where they just don't want to have, mercenary teams. They sort of want to play with the other players. That, look, you have to be good, I assume, but if they have a group of people, they want to play with you. So to bring that back to MIBR, I actually love this move, because if no one's ever seen Lucaozy play, he actually was one of those players that eye test wise is better than the stats. His actual AK is pretty fucking spicy. He's got good aim. He's an aggressive player. I also think I agree with Maui. If you look at the MIBR squad, we're not actually bringing him in it's just going to be like when Electronic joined and Axel went to shit. These two guys could completely coexist. And if they can, by the way, MIBR, is, like I said, is already an IGL from actually being a top 10 team. I would say, I looked at the rankings, they're 23rd now. If this move works out, they can be 15th, 16th or something. They can just move right up. And Insane, it's not just Insane, he's good. Drop, by the way, actually does all the dirty work in this team too, but he's a really good job because he's at a slightly lower level than Furia. And then the one that everyone's written off years ago, this is how I know you don't watch MIBR. Safe's actually a good operator at MIBR. Yeah, look, he's never going to be Modesty. He's not even in, that's not even a dream. But I'll tell you right now, Safe is better than fucking MIBR than Fallen is in Furia, I'm telling you. If you watch the two players. So I actually think this team's not that bad. I already liked them as an odd upset team, but I'm even more interested now. So it's kind of interesting to see. I like this move.
They actually kind of lightly renewed themselves when they well, I don't know if I want to say renewed, but because they swapped to Drop as the in-game leader from Exit.
Oh, right.
And so they did that for Cologne, and they bombed out of Cologne. But I can already say with certainty that at ESL Pro League, they look better. So, that's why this move feels even better now, because I think Drop's kind of figured... I think...
By the way, the Exit guy's a decent player too. He's not even bad either.
Oh, Exit's not bad. He was always
Yeah.
like a decently fragging
Yeah.
in-game leader, and now he actually, I think, can play a little bit better as an individual. Drop hasn't gotten worse once he started in-game leading because he's already playing those support
Right.
positions. But BRNazan has just kind of been the guy that just is
Yes.
the most prone to make wild mistakes or just not hit those like extra kill, that extra multi-kill that you need to win around. So yeah, I think Lucaozy would be great in this
Yes.
system.
I put it this way, when I did that show that King T does where he brings you on and you preview the groups, that was my upset team for this group was MIBR. I picked them as the obvious one. And also I agree on the Branson one. Like, if you don't know, the angle that he's good is some like narrative from about 3 years ago at this point in time. Like, he hasn't been good for a long time at this point. He's surplus to requirements.
He was on, the reason he was kind of talked about was because he was on the MIBR Academy team, and he was kind of the standout player there, but he kind of just got to do hybrid star stuff on that team, as opposed to having to actually fit in a team cleaner. So I think he looked, was it, I don't know if it was, I don't know, I don't think it was We Play, I forgot what he played, but I mean, oh no, it's because he was on MIBR as a stand-in, then he went to MIBR Academy, did very well while he got to do whatever he felt like, and then he moved back, and he's kind of just like, it's just okay.
Okay. Right, my good point is a really interesting one because it's not actually going to be a giant rant for me. I want to more open the floor and see where you guys go with it. So I have picked for my good point that I think actually within literally the last month, we've managed to completely reshape the conversation around Donk as a player. Because unfortunately, because they hadn't been at all the big events, and obviously they haven't had a massive win recently until this like medium-sized Bet Boom Dacha. A lot of people, if you notice, especially on like Reddit and Twitter and stuff, were doing that really brain-dead angle of like, right, well, we can kick Donk out of that conversation. It's just MonteCristo versus Zemu now. Now, look, I understand, guys. I'm painfully aware of what Zemu fans think. I understand that's because Zemu just won a big tournament and was the MVP. So their approach always isn't like, wow, great convo, MonteCristo fans, let's debate this. It's always like, Zemu's the best. If you can't see that, you're blind. Case closed. And so in doing so, all those people were like agreeing, like, well, we can ignore Donk now, can't we? Whereas two things. One, this is where I actually think figures in the community are really important for stimulating conversation. I have to give props to Vu, who we obviously had on this show, because I think he's the one who framed it the best way. He doesn't just say like, I disagree with Zemu or MonteCristo for this reason. He actually asked the most genius question that makes you really have to laterally think. Because it stumped me. This is why it's kind of my Gordian knot I can't solve. Because here's the problem, Maui. I do actually sort of think every time I watch MonteCristo play and be insane, like, by the way, even in that game he actually had in the playoffs of Cologne where they all shit the bed and he was just hard carrying. Whenever I see him do that, my brain does tell me, oh my God, it actually is like mini simple. This guy has to be the best. But Vu is right. His argument goes like this, Skriv. He doesn't say anything about Zemu or MonteCristo. He just says, like, basically, what is Donk doing wrong? Like, what doesn't make Donk the best player, basically ever, by the way, if you watch him? And I have to say, same concept. Every time I load up a Donk game and I watch it, I'm like, shit, he's got me. Like, I look, separately, I can make a great case why MonteCristo's amazing, but when I watch Donk play, it's actually like, this probably is like the greatest single impact any player's ever had on my screen, maybe ever in Counter-Strike. Like, I can't argue against it. It's actually really, in fact, that's why people have to go to weird external angles, like, is he playing enough lands? How many maps did they, and all the shit like that, because the problem is what it's showing you on your screen. So seriously, the reason why I picked this as my good point is, I do feel like actually plebs were just going to make it like Zemu against MonteCristo for the rest of the year. But mate, the Donk angle is actually super fascinating, especially when you remember he is a fucking rookie. He is a pure rookie. Even, by the way, people like Simple and Zemu had sort of like a little ramp up time. We just threw this guy straight in the deep end of Katowice onwards. And as a result, it's why actually, a sign that you know people have finally figured out how cracked he is they're already, think about this, when I frame it this way, guys, you'll get it immediately. You know how everyone hates that we're so harsh on Zemu, but it's because the Zemu fans say he is the best player to ever play. So like LeBron James in basketball, you're going to get extra scrutiny because you're not just saying he's really good, you're saying he's the best ever to do it. So at that point, you have to have the craziest standard. Bro, we're already doing that the whole year to Donk every time he has a bad game. And it's year one. See, Who's in like year 5 or 6 or something, boys? That's when we like crank the scrutiny up. We're doing that to Donk before he's even finished year 1. So I think the convo's in a way healthier place now. I actually do feel like before we were just doing some weird thing of like, well, why didn't Spirit win the event is so good, which is the sort of angle I'll always just put out there, by the way. When people say that, you're not actually asking a thought-provoking question. What you're saying is you never looked into it. If you thought you had the answer to that, you wouldn't ask it. You wouldn't go, why isn't he? You'd go, he's not good enough. That's why he doesn't win the event. So I think now the convo's actually gotten interesting. I think you can make all three sides again, depending on who wins the event. It's actually the convo. It should be the big marquee matchup that we all want.
Yeah, I think when you look at something like an MVP conversation, you should have to take it like to its extremes to really decide. I think that's also what makes it interesting, right? That rather than looking at it, I suppose, from like a Counter-Strike perspective, it would be like, you know, who's won the most events and who's topped the scoreboard the most, you know, like, or HLTV rating or whatever.
Sure.
Seen as that's probably the platform that we're going to be using. So I think when you're in a world where you can have so many different points to look at and to go through, that obviously means that A, community-wise, punditry-wise, and whatever, it's in a healthy spot, but B, in terms of the competition, it's in a healthy spot, you know, rather than a few years that we might have had where, you know, it was out and out, you couldn't argue it, you know, it's going to be a simple or whatever. There was then ZywOo came in and started to make things a bit interesting, but then it was also less interesting because it was just kind of those two. Maybe
Sure.
Nico.
Yeah, that's
people
true.
Like,
you know, no, you're right. The convo at the end
really.
of the year was like, is anyone even allowed to be second? Never mind, like number one. It was just those two. You're right.
Yeah. So I think when we're now in a position that we have two AWPers that play very differently, first of all, and then a rifler in the conversation, that's enough to
that's dope as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's into a new game. It's into the fact that we have a rookie going for it, right? It's just so many different sort of.
That almost even is like the interesting part, actually, Skriv. You're right. It's that it's not even just like Simple and ZywOo were both just primary AWPers that played sort of fairly similar, right? You're right. The other thing that we're doing now is it's like what people should do in the Ballon d'Or, but they never do. Is you have to ask the question: is this just about goal scoring? So should it always be the striker, or can the best midfielder win? Like that's actually an interesting convo. The years you have that, right? And so that's what we're sort of doing with the donk convo. We're asking like, how does he play as opposed to just the stats, right?
Yeah, and it's like you have to also look at it from a perspective of, at least for me, maybe I'm a bit more of a out of the server kind of guy. Like, what have they sort of overcome? Okay. You know, like you say, Donk is a massive rookie, very young, very inexperienced. I would say probably team-wise maybe has a few less resources available, let's say, or like more work to do. Let's put it, you know, more expectations and whatnot. I think maybe ZywOo this year with Vitality has had a few more there.
Oh, for sure.
And then MonteCristo. Also, I think the team should be able to help him out, but they haven't been as much. You know, Nico's been dropping down. But Donk, definitely on sort of a first glance, and the way that we saw him burst on and everyone sort of up from the tier 2 was like, you know, watch this guy. He's going to be insane. He's been absolutely farming, passes the eye test. And then you sort of looked at the rest of the Spirit when he joined in. You're like, can Chopper really lead this guy? You know, are they going to be able to win tournaments, or is it just going to be a case of like good player mid-team kind of thing? So the fact that they've all sort of come together, I think, for him is good, and they've all stepped up, but a lot of that again comes off the back of Donk. But yeah, I think on a more broad conversation, without maybe getting into it as much in terms of, we still got, you know, a few months to go here for the rest of the year. I think that the conversation is like in a really, really good spot. It's got a bit more debate, but also it feels like maybe because of Donk, maybe it does come from a place of, you know, supporters and can be a little heated when it comes to like ZywOo fans or whatever. But it is a lot broader. There's a lot more factors to consider here that I think will really sort of answer the question. I think it's also going to be one of those things, right? HLTV Awards at the end of, the start of next year, everyone will have their eyes on and they'll want to know who's getting the MVP, you know, rather than, again, a two-horse race can sometimes be a little bit slow, or we've had a few years where we've just had one player who is out and out the best.
I'm pretty sure haven't they only done the awards like 2 years now? I think they only did it since 2022, didn't they? Isn't that the first time? Right, as far as I know, because like it was Simple and then ZywOo, I think everyone actually already knew who was going to win that one. If it stays as it is now, genuinely, I don't think anyone actually knows. Like, I'm not sure who even the HLTV bias would be towards it. Maybe MonteCristo, I'm not sure. Like, because I think he has the most like EVPs or something. But I have to say, if they actually paused it right now, you know, like they did last year, where they keep the top 3 private, I actually think it would be the most hype one ever. Surely no one would know technically.
I mean, one thing that I feel like has helped shift the conversation, there's two things. One is I think that Vu made such a strong point. We've kind of taken our spins on the point as to the fact that the role is just so difficult. But I'm going to be completely honest and very cynical about this community, that one of the reasons that Donk was not actually talked about in that conversation between Monacy and Zywoo, and that he's out and that people are actually saying that, is that HLTV users couldn't make the 1 calorie motion of scrolling down on the top players list and adjusting the map minimum to actually show Donk. So they didn't see his name when you click top players immediately. Right. And you had to always change the map minimum because Donk just wouldn't show up, and neither would Shiro. And that's why people would underrate Shiro. They would underrate Donk. And now, actually, when you click top players just off the rip, it's just going to show Donk's right there because he's played Bet Boom. So I also think that I think also fans have this bad knack of just like, the conversation's over. Okay, we get it. This isn't your job, and you don't want to watch as many games, and you want to be a narrative driver without actually having to put in the hard work of watching these games, which should be entertainment, but it's just that you want to create a whole narrative based off of watching one Vitality game every 2 weeks. And another thing is that I think that when I think about best player, or like even if I wanted to shift it to like an MVP conversation, I do think like there's so many angles that I would still construct as to why Donk is the #1 player. And I'm glad that I think that's kind of become the new common narrative, because Zywoo, Donk, Monacy, if you strip them away and just put an average player at that position, I actually think that the fall off from G2 would probably be the least. I think Zywoo would actually hurt, him leaving Vitality for an average opper would hurt Vitality kind of a decent amount. But if you just had an average entry fragger instead of Donk, dude, Spirit are bums.
Oh, they'd be like the 12th best team or something, wouldn't they? Yeah,
they're fucking bums. True. Like, you'd have Shiro and 4 bums. Like, I know I'm probably downplaying like what Chopper's doing or whatever. It's like, dude, I've seen Spirit be like the 17th best team in the world with a similar core to this before, when they just don't have Donk and they still have a star opper. They were like that with Dexter. They were like that with Wonderful. They're not actually doing well in tournaments regularly. And I feel like Flom, despite the little bit of pushback he got, like, I think he was on the money. I think that when Donk dies, this team still falls apart. I just looked it up while we were talking there, is that like Donk on round victories has 120 ADR for Spirit at big events with a top 20 filter. Simple in 2021 had 115. Zywoo this year has 110. Monacy has less than that himself. He has 108. So like Donk is putting in like 20% more damage or 10% more damage than the other best players in the world right now in the round victories. And when he dies,
also, by the way, think about this, Maui. Here's the difference as well. That simple number, he wasn't fucking going first on T side. I'll tell you that right now. So that ADR is impossible. Yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, and Simple's numbers were better in that 2021, but he was saving twice as much. He was saving twice as like Donk is never saving. If Donk sometimes saw someone like on the other side of the map die early on and just decided, I'm gonna save and not try to run through a brick wall to get back into the round, his rating would be better. They probably lose more because he does win 1 out of 3 of those, but his numbers would definitely be better. And so that's HLTV rating punishing because his KAST isn't good enough, or his DPR isn't high enough, or is good
also
enough.
Going to be probably going to be the least baity elite player of all time, bro. Like, he just sacrifices his life anytime. Yeah, of course.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's honestly like my premise for a long time has been I rate these kind of fraggers incredibly high. Sure. And it's also why that people know I had like such a thing for Yakindar when he was coming into the scene, because he was doing this for VP. But Donk's on a completely another level. He's in a different stratosphere than other entry fraggers right now.
Okay. Right, let's move on then. Skriv, what is your bad point?
So it feels like a little bit of an obvious one, given sort of that opening to Pro League, but my bad point is the Faze performances as of late. Maybe I had a little look, watched a few previous episodes. I was like, has anyone brought this up? Has anyone talked about it? It seems like not. Maybe, way back, maybe, because they have been obviously on a bit of a downturn for a while. But I think what really brings it to the forefront for me is just the Cologne performance, right? Not only losing to Saw, obviously, huge game for Saw, huge clutch for like Mutiris, career defining for those guys, of course. But just the way that they played as well, like really didn't look like themselves, really didn't look like they were sort of fully in it. You listen to sort of like the player comms, which is a really nice touch that we've been having a bit more of, like live, as it were, rather than just sort of at the half. And it just felt like maybe Frozen was being like the most vocal. Beyond that, there wasn't a lot in the mid round. I don't even know that Carrigan was necessarily in their loads. I'm not sure where they're at. Also, having seen them at Pro League, obviously they had this loss against Sangal. They did beat them sort of after that to make the playoffs. But I think like this team I think they're just burnt out, you know? I don't know, and they've talked about it a lot, of course, but I think it really is coming to a head now where you've got players like Carrigan who, you know, has maybe achieved his glory and just needs a little bit of a break, like an extended kind of break. Because I can imagine that during player breaks and things like this, a team like Faze still working. But it's tough to watch, like for some of the players, you know. And they're a team that I think it feels like most of the Counter-Strike community are behind. We always want them to do well. They always get like the positive narratives of like, oh, they start off slow in groups, guys. Don't worry about it. They'll pick their game up and everything. And I think that they've stopped performing. What I will say in their defense, obviously it's an open floor in terms of where you guys want to go with it, but in their defense, I will say that coming second so very often has got to be so disheartening. And I think there is maybe a little bit of solace in the fact for them that it's like, okay, well, we lost in a few of these deeper run positions, in a few of these quarterfinals, whatever it may be. Potentially not a bad thing for them to like remember what it is to kind of lose and be like, all right, it wasn't our day, rather than in that final, like we could have had it, we could have had it, we could have had it, we could have had it. Also maybe as well a severe cool off after winning Chengdu. It's like, all right, we finally won one. Like the psychology, I think, is just sort of chilling for them and cooling off, right? That there's still this obviously phase level that they have, but I think that it is really, really difficult for them to keep at that and to perform to that kind of level. And I just think there's a couple of players in here where Rain is ever the soldier and all this kind of stuff. But again, maybe coming to sort of the end of his tenure, just because I feel like they need a little bit more energy. You know, you've got New Blood and Frozen. Ropsoy's been a bit quieter. Brokey, we know, is maybe vocal in game, not so much out. But I think that they need a little bit more. And maybe it is like Carrigan feels like the obvious sort of thing, that it's like his numbers, his play style might just be dying off. And I think that their sort of downturn recently is sort of just due to this fact that they've been on the burnout. They've been playing way too much, and they've just not really had a break for like 2 years. It feels like some of these players, you know, where they've just been on a constant run, so many expectations, and very much always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They've had some really, really tough losses since CS2 has come out. I think that Carrigan really wanted Kato, really wanted the major, and I don't know, you just have a few in here where they're getting a little indifferent, they're getting a little complacent. I don't know what you guys make of that.
I feel like, man, I think I would need to do a bigger breakdown of why FaZe seem like they're behind. I feel like for me, when I watch them, they just sometimes rely on individuals a little too much on their T sides, but I would have to really look back at it, because when I've seen FaZe be bad before on T sides, sometimes they just kind of throw sort of like outdated nades, or it feels like they haven't updated their playbook as much. And that was something that Neo was really good at when he first joined the team. I feel like the honeymoon was really strong for him, where he brought a lot to the table. They talked about it in interviews, how he brought a lot of new ideas, new strats. I'm not sure if they're doing that the same way that they were before, but I also feel like one thing is that I just never really, I still hold out for FaZe. I still hold out in a way where I'm just like, man, until it's the biggest stage at the biggest moment, then I'll judge FaZe, but I'm not going to really judge, for example, like a BO3 loss to Sangal as the opening game of an ESO Pro League, where they know they have 3 lives. Like, this format is so forgiving that they're still going to just cruise through the rest of the games almost surely, and as long as they just don't, like, then we have to, like, they're so consistently good at making it out of groups that if they fail, say, to make playoffs for 2 tournaments in a row, then I would start ringing some alarm bells for these other tournaments. But if they're still making playoffs of Cologne, if they're still going to make playoffs of Pro League, I think they already did actually, then they're going to just go pretty much like top 8, top 4, whatever the playoffs is of every single tournament they play, then it's like it's kind of like I call them the great procrastinators, and been calling them that for a couple of years, because I just feel like they just don't care that much until the biggest moment. And they're kind of like the bad student that's kind of smart, that knows he can just cram at the last second and then just up his game 15% or 25% for that big exam. And that's just where I am with Faze, where I don't think they are probably putting in 100% for ESO Pro League day one, group A, match one, upper bracket one. Like, it's just like that doesn't excite them at all. Studio doesn't excite them. And I feel like that's a bad habit, though, and I think that those bad habits have come back to bite them, which is why they've only won one event, despite the fact that, in my eyes, they have the skill to win more than just one event this year, more than just a Chengdu. It's probably because they're just kind of like coasting in a way. But yeah, maybe I'll do a deeper dive on them myself, because I would love to know the real, like, who in the server is failing to their role, with the exception that Rops has been worse, but like, I don't really know if that's everything in this whole picture.
Yeah, I'll actually pick up on the last point. I do think the problem with Faze, and it's actually been the same way ever since Rops joined the team in 2022, which is they only have two modes. They either look amazing and they can beat anyone, they can win the tournament, which is what people expect both in CSGO. That's why if you notice, in that last year of CSGO, the criticism got really harsh when they were finally like odd times just bombing a tournament, like not even making a deep run. And then because they did the glow up again in CS2, as he said, they were in all those finals, I feel like people over scrutinize Faze failure. Like, if you notice, it's never like, oh, they've dropped off, what do they need to do to fix it? It's always, every time, if you're a noob, it's kick Carrigan, which is why actually when Austin gave like an interesting approach on that, it was actually so unique, because it wasn't just he isn't fragging, it was like actually a decent angle on why you might do it. But I think the other angle is then just people pick whoever they don't like. If they don't like Robs, kick him, he's baiting. If they think Frozen's not as good as he should be, well, you need a star player. If you want, I don't know, fucking Simple to join as an AWP, you got to kick Brokey, whatever angle people take. But I agree with Maui. I actually think people go too far the opposite way with the overcorrection. They make every single playoffs. Like, if you don't know, guys, the one tournament they didn't make playoffs of this year was Blast, and then they just won the showdown anyway, so they're back into the Blast 4-5. So they're in every fucking tournament, so they can't be bad, guys. Like, understand, if you're in every single top 8, you are still a good team. Like, something fundamentally does work about your team. In fact, I'd even say, for all the people sort of naysaying them, there's not many teams can beat Faze twice in a row, guys. Go look it up. Like, they might lose, like Sangal found. You can beat them once, but you won't just like beat them 2-3 times in a row. It doesn't happen. Not many teams can do it. You have to be the best teams pretty much to do that. If you look at the actual players, if you want to diagnose some of their problems, I mean, I actually think this is an example of why, when they were so good in 2022, I did think they should be hailed as like one of the best teams to ever play Counter-Strike. Because when I say that line, like they do it by committee, it actually makes it sound, I think, to a fan, like it's easier to do it by committee. It's actually harder. It's why I think when he did it in the Mouse Sports team with Rops, Frozen and Woxic, it was amazing. Because by definition, guys, the reason it's easier to not do it by committee and just have the Ziwu, the Monacy, the Donk, is you're not really doing what they do. They're taking care of that part. And then you manage the rest of the team. You manage the maps and the seaside calls and the backups and what do we do when he dies? When you do it by committee, you either have to have the most god-tier man management ever, because you've got to keep essentially like 3 stars. It's like keeping plates spinning. You've got to keep them all sort of going at once. So you've got to have Brokey doing his JW moves at the same time that Rops is doing the godlike fucking Uber lurk. And in this world, then you have to get Frozen in the mix so he's enough aggressive that he gets the kills, but he doesn't bait to like, fuck it, this is really hard, boys. And then Rain, the story goes, this is why it just actually, the joke is, the more you hear about Faze, it's the other way around. The more impressive Carrigan's job sounds. So apparently Rain doesn't even have a playbook and is just doing whatever he wants, like some old school sports throwback where he's like, I've got it, coach, don't worry. And he just goes and, I don't know, this analogy here would be like, I don't know, he's like some free safety that just shuts down every wide receiver without even having the game plan. Like, okay. So the problem you always come to at the end of every Faze discussion is this. One, there's an obvious reason they're not as good as these other teams. They don't have a donk. Like, even if Frozen's stats are the best, look, Frozen is a really good player. He's probably a top 10 player. But the difference is, if we're talking about the impact of the donks, it's just so many levels above. Like, Frozen isn't going to 1v9 a whole best of 3 and win you it. He's not going to do that. He's not going to get a 90 kill performance like a donk or a Monacy will. Sometimes even in a loss. That's not going to happen. But, like, you look at the squad, they're all pretty much still good players. Like Rops the last few months had a little glow up when Brokey had the glow down. So my problem is I think in their team, there's so much pressure for like 2 or 3 people to have to play well at once. That's where you've got a hard spot. But I'll always put it back on you. So I want to ask each of you this. This is where no one has the fucking nuts to actually properly criticise Faze. Because if you're going to criticise Faze, you have to pick a player to remove. I'm not even saying bring someone in. Who you could bring in is hard to know who was available, who'd want to join. I'm just saying, I don't feel like anyone can get a bead on who you remove. That's why I thought the Austin angle a few months back of like, I'd take Carrigan out. It's obviously the most bold move ever. But I'll tell you what, if you pick anyone else, it's hard. Like, I'll give you the obvious example. Even if you do Skriv the angle of Rain's getting kind of old, surely eventually he has to retire. Yeah, but he'll still like clockwork every 2.5 events, just like pop off in a series and you'll be like, well, shit. How do I take out that player who's got no resources? He's just killing everyone. So who would you pick? Who would each of you, if you had to play, I'm saying like if I force you to take one player out of Faze, who were you each taking?
Yeah.
Who would you pick?
I think my head immediately goes to Rops, to be honest, because I think that maybe in terms of the market for his roles, it's maybe a little bit easier to replace.
Right.
And then also it just sort of feels like he's the one that's lost his spark, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, we expected so much out from him. He was looking good at the start of CS2.
Oh, it was mega, yeah.
You know, we were like, this is going to be his game. And then he has just kind of dropped off. And I think that the drop off, there's maybe, again, it's, you know, deeper checkouts here.
Okay.
But there's maybe a bit of a correlation in terms of like with Frozen joining.
Okay.
And sort of the Rops drop. Maybe that is a switch over of like resources a little bit, Frozen wanting a little bit more. I think it's not even going to be like an intentional thing that they've, you know, worked out beforehand, that it's like, okay, Frozen's going to get these roles. I think it is more like in the mid round in the game, because Frozen's just a much more vocal and like asks for these types of things that maybe Rops in the past would have been able to push for, if that makes sense. So I think there's a little bit of like, obviously not team cohesion or whatever, but maybe friction in terms of the end product between those two players. And it feels like Rops is maybe the easiest to, yeah, well, I mean, it is Rops, right? But like in terms of the roles and whatnot, I think that he would be a little bit easier to replace. And then just the fact that it's just not the Rops that we know at the moment. If you had to make it like tomorrow kind of thing is maybe my caveat for sure, because he could easily leave the team, go somewhere else and return to form, you know, if given the same kind of resources. But yeah, I think that he has to be the player for me that, I don't know, he's not causing problems. It's always tough. It's always tough.
It's a problem.
Like, you know, with where to go.
By the way, what you just said at the end there is also what I was actually going to reply, which is it's the same thing I've said every time people on these shows criticize Vitality members. So, you know, when there's times when people will be like, I think Spink Spate's too much. So, you know what? Kick him out the team. Go on. Right, let's imagine you kick him out. Right, we'll take him. So, same thing, Skriv. You just kick Drops out of the team. Well, you know what? Vitality will take him. You know what I mean? GT will take him. And then, listen, in 3 months, I'll tell you what, you're going to be fucking going, shit. Look at that best of 3. Go on then, Maui. What would your pick be? Who you kicking out of Faze hypothetically?
I would just go with what I've been going with for the past like 3 years. I would just do Rain. Because I think that there's a handful of aggressive riflers right now that would die to be on Faze. Xantares is 1. Elige is number 2. Like, give me one of those guys.
All right,
and, like this.
Maui, I'll give it one little gem. Okay, let's just say, what if I told you? Remember, we had Elige on a past episode. I asked him to his face, but what if I told you, a little bird told me, if it was actually like a real elite team, like NAVI or Faze, Elige would move to Europe and join? What if I was to tell you that? Would that be interesting?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to plant that seed. See that seed? Put it out there. Just pour a little bit of water on it. Let the sun do its job. That's all I'm saying. I'll plant that seed. So I'm saying, if you are out there, that would be interesting.
You know, I actually, in this space, operate in a way where, like, you know, some people give me leaks. Like, I get leaks. Okay. I don't bring them up on these shows. I don't really tweet about them. I don't even talk about them on stream necessarily. But one thing is that when the people that have accurately given me leaks give me them, I don't really just keep hounding them for more. Because I like to just kind of theory craft these roster moves.
It's also fun to figure out yourself. Like you say, you don't want to know everything, do you? It's half the fun figuring out yourself what's hypothetically possible, right?
Elige to Faze for Rain would be unbelievable. I would root for this team. Like, this team would be like, all right, we're really cooking right here. Because the problem with Faze is that, like, so many of their rounds on T side, are, I actually just criticized earlier when making my point about them is that I think their T sides can look a little bit iffy, like they don't really always seem the most well structured. But I'm also kind of like memory holding the fact that one of the reasons G2 and Spirit's T sides look as good as they do is because they have incredible entry riflers right now who are doing the heavy lifting for them in these positions, which is just like, it's incredibly hard to get a 5v4 on T side. It's just so hard. But when you have an Elige, a Nico, a Donk, or Xantares, it's not as hard. It makes things look a lot better, a lot easier. So yeah, that would be my move. And I guess like my 1B move is if we're gonna still have that same narrative, which is sort of dated. Actually, it's not that dated because Frozen joined them a year ago. If we're gonna go with that and Maus is their farm academy, you could also go for Exertion for Rain. But my 1B would be just Yimpat for Rops. I think he's like the new, improved, upgraded version of him. I think he moves a little bit faster on his lurks. I think his anchoring has been better in general. So he desires less resources, and he actually is outputting better numbers than Rops. So as of right now, Yimpat for me is just a 1-for-1 upgrade for Rops.
Also, by the way, if people haven't noticed, I don't try to hide my biases. My actual like move for every single star player I like is just give him the Carrigan. That's why the joke is, even though he can't play right now, just fucking give Simple to him as well. Give any of these fucking guys. I mean, the real one I've mentioned in the past that no one even bothers to connect together is people in their brain still do that thing where they go Zemu French, Vitality French, Apex French, so they have to play together. It's like, bro, you know all those problems we're talking about with Zemu every fucking month. Give him to Carrigan and let's just see what happens. You know what I mean? Just give me that for 6 months. Let me see what Zemu piloted by Carrigan on T sides. Like, just give me 6 months of that, please.
The one guy I need to see piloted by Carrigan is Electronic gonna ruin Faze if he goes.
Is that like the immovable object versus the irresistible force? It's like Carrigan's ability to make a star player play better, whereas like Electronic walks in the room, immediately everyone's vibes down, their roles just don't make sense to them, so they can't even read the strat book. Like, there's some weird shit going on with that.
It's the anti-Nexa.
It's like he must just walk in the room, and you know, like that old meme of like scared to look at the alpha. Does Flick just start like counting his feet or something like, yeah, you just have all the roles, Mr. Electronic, sir. Sorry, sir. Like, I know what's going on with that. That's the biggest mystery of all.
Norbert's still doing well, but everybody just starts blaming him instead of Electronic for ruining the entire vibe.
I also love the idea, by the way, just as a random aside, that actually is still how it goes. Where even though Norbert did get actually for real way better, every rumor is still just like we're all gonna Men in Black that, including people in his own team. And every rumor's like Norbert to be kicked next week. And you're like, why though? Why? And they're like, just kick him. He's fucking Norbert. Like, you can't win, can you?
Yeah, I know.
It's actually bad in it. I know.
It's like it's the one player where the nameplate is actually doing them a
disservice
right now, and the eye test is actually helping him, if anything.
Yes, I agree. No, he just can't overcome the inertia of his old reputation, basically. It's actually like just crushing him over like a tidal wave. Right, okay, Maui, what is your bad point?
My bad point is a team that crashed out of the ESL Pro League here, and I mean, I just get so frustrated with them, but I also want to do a little bit of narrative correction with them. Is that, and we've talked about them for a variety of reasons over the last couple years. They've had some really bad lineup iterations, and this one, I thought, there's a little bit of juice here. I thought my hot take a while back was that actually if I were to power rank them, I would have put them as maybe like the 12th best team in the world, and they've only regressed. They have only gotten worse since I've said that. I thought, lo and behold, like, I guess, what, I'm super unlucky because of all the teams that are like, oh, they're trying to put the pieces together. Oh, MIBR is looking a little bit better. Oh, like Eternal Fire, they're regaining some form, here and there. Like, even Fury is showing some better signs. Like, NIP has gotten way worse than what I said about them 2 months ago. And this team is just a disaster outside of Wrinkle and Rez. I just do not like watching them at all. Their mid-rounding is atrocious. And I feel like there's no bright spots on this team besides them. And the problem is that when you have Rez and Wrinkle, unfortunately, I think Wrinkle can develop his game and slow it down, become a little bit more consistent, not try to, like, they're basically sending him on suicide op kamikaze missions every single round as he's trying to entry on mid Anubis, mid Ancient. They're just flinging him out on Nuke with a run boost, and you can't even run boost bunny hop the same way you could in CSGO because this team is so so devoid of ideas for openers that they are just saying, fuck it, Wrinkle, just run at them. Like, at this point, Alex is using Wrinkle like he's Donk. Like, he has an op, by the way. It's like he's trying to literally 1v9 with the AWP, and Rez is trying his damnedest to put together these pieces and, like, trying to make sure he can still get a multi-kill from a good position. But I just think that this NIP team, again, has led me to, I don't think they're making the major. I don't think they're making the major. I think they're way too weak right now. I think that some of these other teams on the come up right now, like Sangal, have looked better than them overall. And so right now, my bad point is just, yeah, NIP outside of Wrinkle and Rez is a disaster. Maxter has not brought up his game. And the funniest thing, someone said in my chat, this is a little bit of a tangent. Someone said this in my Twitch chat yesterday, and I just couldn't help but laugh. And it was like, they said, apologize, Maxter, for having an extra S in your name. There's no point that he has the S in his name at all. Like, it would still pronounce the same without it.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, accurate. I don't know, man. Honestly, I knew as well. The thing is, when you were like, I've got a team, they bombed out, I was like, it's going to be NIP, you know, before you even kind of finish your first sentence. And I don't know, man. I don't know. I think that for me, I remember they added Alex, and obviously this is someone that I'm very familiar with, and we've seen Movistar Riders make one deep run. They had a run within tier 2. I think they won like 2 back-to-back challenges or whatever with some Pius and everything. And I don't know. I was just like, why? You know, why this guy? They were always even sort of well known within the level that they played in as like a sort of national team, bit of a vibes team. If everything's going well for them, or if they're on like LAN or next to each other, then they'll perform well. But beyond that, like online, they sort of famously fell off massively and just couldn't win games against teams you've never heard of. So it felt like such a wild, like, chasing smoke kind of pickup for NIP. And I don't know that he really had got his flowers. I don't know that he really was like this great mastermind, or, oh my goodness, I can't believe he's actually made these deep runs with these kinds of players. I think we saw why they made those deep runs. It was namely Sun Pius. He then gets picked up and sort of continued on. So I really don't know. Maybe the NIP are sort of a bit desperate. And I think one of the things for me as well with NIP as an organization is that, yes, maybe we've had a change in like leadership, so they are less scummy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have learned how to build a Counter-Strike team. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that there's still a real flaw in the way that they pick up players, the way that they try and build teams. And for me, I think that the two obvious pieces you have to sort of build from are like an IGL and an AWPer. The AWPer is good. He's not quite on the money quite yet, but maybe he's a player that they've got to build into, whatever, still young, still a rookie talent, all this kind of stuff. But IGL wise is the big thing for me, like, to look at this team and just say that they haven't done their due diligence. They haven't sort of forked out, as it were, or they haven't got someone who really could build a team. There are many, I feel, tier 2 IGLs that they easily could have swung towards. Some of the Danish guys I think would have been really good for a team like this, where you need to build up structure from the ground up. Someone like Alex been playing with the same guys for so long, and like I say, they are very much sort of energy based. Yes, they've got good players, but from a calling perspective, it just felt like he would call something, they would all do it, and it would work. And then all of a sudden, that hit a level where it took them far, and they made a few good runs and won a couple of lands and whatnot within their own space, within their own lane. But beyond that, there's really... we never heralded this guy as being an incredible sort of IGL. And especially as well, he was also an IGL, I think, that called a lot more around himself. You know, he played a lot more of the greedier roles on certain maps. So a really kind of difficult IGL to then integrate into a team where you have individuals that are supposed to be better than you. So that, for me, was like the first issue. And then you have a couple of players in here again where, like, Maxter, there's maybe something there, you know, but he's come from the Young Ninjas team, so it's an easy pickup, you know, it's an easy kind of contractual business decision. And then Isaac, I think, yeah, certainly could have seen him coming out of Game of Legion, but again, not going to blow your socks off. So it's one of these where we have this organization, we have like the legendary name of NIP, you want them to perform well, but unfortunately they just don't seem to be pulling the book out, so to speak, and really leveling up their team in the right way. But as Maui's kind of saying, the way that they also play as well just doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And I think that I don't know what's going on, but it just seems like the underlying way that they approach rounds, the way that they try and build a team is flawed, and just is not a smart way of going about it, really. And I think that when you have players like this who are a little more inexperienced with the top level, even Alex himself, you have to build from a textbook structure and then sort of go from there and then make your team there and hope that within that structure you have players like Wrinkle and maybe it looks like, Rez, I guess, sure, is what we're sort of getting at here. They can find a way to be the hero or be the star or whatever it is as it should be formatted. But yeah, just really wild, really, really wild to see this team continue dropping. And I think everyone is sort of behind them as well, where it's like, we want them to do well. And unfortunately, they just don't have that kind of level. The one maybe caveat that I'll sort of give them here, Maui, on the Pro League performance at the very least, it's a pretty rough group for them, and they did get a little bit shafted with some of the other results, as it were, if that makes sense. But I think from an eye test perspective, you're probably on the money.
The problem is, this isn't like the roster. People are forgetting they didn't make the roster moves in the play break. They had their roster set before the play break. So that's also why I have to be harsher on NIP. It's like, this isn't one of those ones, like if G2 stumbles now, I'm going to be like, well, at the same time, I wasn't overreacting to them to get the players. So give it like another month, and then we'll see where they're at, right? I sort of feel like I have seen it all from NIP now. Like I've seen enough from them. That's the problem. And the flaws are so apparent, even in terms of the players. It's like, how can I really sort of like hope this gets better? Like an obvious angle I'll say about their roster is this, right? They need an NIP to shit or get off the pot. You have to ask yourself this question. Are you holding out the naive dream that because you have 3 Swedish players and you are NIP, one day you will be a Swedish team again? Because if you are, by the way, now's actually the time to make that move. What you should logically do, if you ever care about being Swedish, you should take Wrinkle, who is the most obvious trade bait you could have right now. Loads of teams would sign him, by the way. Like, I'll guarantee from scrims, people know he's really skilled, and he's just some Ukrainian player, so there's no, like, culture fit to NIP. You could sell him, by the way, right now, probably for, like, 700k, 500k, like a very help. By the way, sadly, they'll probably ask for over $1 million, so I don't think they'll be selling him. But essentially, if people are hyped enough, you could sell him. Then you take that money and you go and you buy Hampus and Nork or Drake and whoever it needs to fill out. You do your 5-man squad. Because if you're not going to do that, this is the very important thing to listen to here in IP. If you're not going to do that, then why are we having 3 Swedish players? That's the obvious question. Because that's the part that doesn't make sense. Like I said about the Zimu point with Vitality, right? You know this whole Maxter thing, where what people are going to do is this, they're going to go, well, he was on the academy team and we believe in him and he's only 20. It's like, none of that matters if you're just an international team trying to be top 10 in the world. Like, you don't need to have him. You know what's brilliant? You can get any player as long as they speak English. So I don't need a guy who, the fact he's 20 doesn't help him in that regard. The fact that he came for your academy doesn't help him in that regard. Like, you actually have to be good. So Maxter for me just hasn't been it. The Isaac signing looked quite interesting, like a positive move. It's been kind of shit. He actually hasn't been a good player, unfortunately. So there's 2 of your 3 Swedes. Toss them in the bin. We don't need those ones. Rez is still good, but even then, he's not like a prime all player. He's just a good player. Funny thing is, essentially in their team, he's almost like the Rain. He's just a good player, but he's not some star player. So the problem you also have is, I feel like to a shitter, they actually think Wrinkle's overrated. They watch these games and they go, NIP lose all the time. It's like, no, because the joke is, I agree with Maui, they make Wrinkle do way too much, bro. And the problem is, he has the personality for it. I've talked about it on past episodes. I actually fucking love this guy's ego. I actually love that he actually does think like he is some swagged out person. Like by the way people reacted to that wonderful Wrinkle, like, beef was so sad because guys, you were doing that thing of like, well, wonderful care about you, mate. He's won a major, little boy. Don't even know you. They literally know each other and are childhood rivals and friends. You cretin. And the point Wrinkle's making, which is a totally apt point, which by the way everyone agrees with when you're not talking about Wrinkle. You all criticize Wonderful all the time and say maybe he's the guy in Navi who's not good enough. So what Wrinkle's basically doing is he's saying, yeah, I agree. I'm actually better than you. I'm just on Nip and you're on Navi. Harvey, bro. So you know what? I'm going to beat you heads up. I love that. I actually want more of that in the scene. That's fucking fire. So sadly, I actually think to come all the way back, I think an IP is nothing at the moment. Like the Alex pickup was just a complete swing and a miss. By the way, as a quick aside, that is easily my least favourite category of player in Pro Counter-Strike. A 27-plus-year-old mega veteran who played in one national scene for years. Muteris, Madger. I don't give a fuck about these players. Like, they are legends in their domestic scene. So, spoiler, when you take them out of their domestic scene, why am I interested? They're not legends of the whole Counter-Strike scene, guys. So the issue is, if I was Spanish, I'd really care. I'm not Spanish, so I don't give a fuck. Like, to me, Alex never was. This is why, now you know why I rode so hard with Alexi B, guys. He wasn't just some good IGL for a Finnish guy who could lead a Finnish. No, he was really good for any team. These guys, like, there's a reason they were in their scene, like the fucking Bane pit for 10 years. Like, they should go back to the Bane pit. Like, the real world isn't for them. So I just don't know what this lineup is. Like I said, a lot of my confidence for this lineup is, one, I know Wrinkle. My eye test tells me he's a real talent. And two, I do believe in existing threat. Like, give him more time, give him some money. That's the last thing I'll throw in there. The one bright spot is this. One, I personally think after this season, after the major, someone will come along and just buy Wrinkle. It just seems so obvious to me. At which point, you have a million options of what you do with that money if it's like $1 million or something. And then two, also, this roster, to be fair, even though I'm saying existing threat are in charge, it's like the third rebuild in about 2.5 years. So I doubt it was the one with much money. This looks like the really budget one where you have to sort of money ball it, don't you? And find maybe the Movistar Riders guy could do it. Oh, let's get that guy from Game Elite. It looks like you did that, didn't it? Like, I don't really believe this. So let's say in a year from now, you get the Wrinkle money and you can actually have the funds to do a real one. Like I said, there's two obvious ways you do it. Either make the Swedish team and commit to that. You can still do that, by the way. It's a valid angle. Or just say, fuck the Swedish angle. It's like, it would be like if Maus just had to have 3 Germans on deck at all times, but then we're an international team. It's like, bro, Maus, their whole strength is not having German players right now. That's the beauty. They didn't even keep JDC, by the way. They were like, thanks for building that team, Daps. I mean, JDC, we'll take it from here with all the winning, which is just a cruel joke against Daps. And he's probably thinking, why am I catching strays? That's all you're catching in Counter-Strike at the moment, mate. Do you not see NRG? No one? Anyway, right, enough about that. So, although the joke there is now it's Nitro just getting all the strays there too. So, bring it all the way back. I will just do my bad point now, because I think we talked enough about NIP. My bad point is actually just, it's a rare time I will ever do this. It's just going to be a purely sentimental one. It's not even that bad for esports. So you might have seen, Skriv, it was announced that there might never be esports events in Jönköping, Sweden anymore, where Dreamhack takes place, right? Now, what's funny is, I actually wasn't a big fan of going there. Like, I hated the fact if I went for an esports event. Famously, I've been to Jönköping for like 2 or 3 majors and probably like 7 events just as an analyst, by the way. I used to go as a journalist, and the joke used to be, I've been to like 1.5 after parties because it's a place that's in like the Swedish Bible Belt in the middle of nowhere without nightclubs. So like famously, some of the Dreamhack after parties were in a barn. And sometimes I finished the event after 4 best of 3s at like 12:30 and there was 1 hour of the after party. So I haven't got like super fun memories. But the reason why I say it's bad that there's no more esports at Dreamhack in Jönköping is this reason. There are so many players and talent and people I know in Counter-Strike who say that is like one of the greatest moments of your career is when you go to Jönköping and you've heard the stories of what Dreamhack is and you walk into that hall, and if people don't know, it used to famously have the stat that it was the biggest LAN party in the world, because when you would go there would literally be 10,000 people with their PC that they brought BYOC to Dreamhack, and you would have it all set up. So even though for esports it's sort of a relic of past times, because in the modern day we have esports tournaments in their own venues. We don't actually have them even with BYOC anymore. That's like a thing of the past. But that's what was actually cool about Dreamhack, is it actually was sort of like the ultimate throwback event where you could sort of like feel like, this is the angle I want to paint the picture for you here, guys. If you were some guy, Launders is a great example. If you were some guy sat on a PC half your life in Canada where there wasn't some giant 10,000 person LAN like this, and you got hired finally to come all the way across the Atlantic and then go to Gothenburg Airport and then take that 3-hour bus, and you get there and you walk in there and you just see like line after line after line, like some movie, some like never-ending mirror hall of PC. That is like a fucking epic one. That feels like, oh, it's real. Esports is real. Like, I'm here. I've made it. And so I think the idea that no one will get that anymore, and that in the modern day, It's just totally separate from like the grassroots scene. And what happens is when you get hired for an event, you just go into a studio and go, "Hey guys, where am I setting up?" Like all this. That has lost something. Like there was something about esports that there was like magical, and people couldn't believe it was real. And like we've saw, I guess the innocence of esports for me with this move has died in a way. Like now it's just some corporate sports shit. You know, we're not really like the old school of what we thought it was once. You've been to some Dreamhack, surely, Skriv?
Not DreamHacks necessarily. I've done like the UK version of.
Fair enough.
So, and it is very similar actually, because we still have Epic Land, which like, you know, a lot of people in the UK will know, and, you know, goes back many, many years. Henry G's, you know, I think he might have won one, come second at a few, that kind of thing. But, you know, he was playing there, for example. But the one that we sort of lost a bit more recently, it's maybe a lot more similar, because Epic Land is just sort of purely competition, as it were, and is a little more, there's a few teams that are going to take it seriously, but it's not as expo-y, as it were. But I seem to remember, like, you know, Jönköping sort of grew into that a bit more Gamescom type energy as well, like having a few like games being shown off and things like that. The one that in the UK that went recently was Insomnia, or I-Series, you might know it as, and this kind of thing. So that's gone. And that's been around, you know, as long as I've been around and I can remember, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's people that have come and gone and all they played was Insomnias and things like this. So, it does feel like maybe we're losing a little bit of the offline element. I think because there is just so much that you can do digitally and across borders and all this sort of thing. But it is also a rite of passage, you know. I've done the Epic Lands, and you're in there, you do like 12 hours a day. It's all voluntary. And you all sleep in the same room, you know. I think they've maybe stepped their game up a little bit in terms of the people going are like, actually, I'm going to get a hotel room because that's not quite how I want to live. But yeah, the first Epic LAN I did, we all stayed in the same room, did all the talent. So that was much to the behest, because it was myself and Jay snoring a fair bit. So, you know, we got a few complaints about that. But yeah, I think that on the level of like where Dreamhack and Jönköping and all this kind of stuff, like, it felt like an event that, yeah, you hear about and you would sort of have to go to. You'd have to do that rite of passage, whether it was maybe talent, maybe not so much. There's many different avenues, but like as a player, I think from that kind of area, you'd want to go and you'd want to show yourself off. And, you know, the Copenhagen Games was maybe another one that we've not really heard much from post-COVID and whatnot. So, yeah, I think that we're losing a lot of that. I think innocence is the right word for it, in the sense of the grassroots and the it's still going to be there, but it's just going to be different. I think that everything's going to be very, very digitized now, you know, and everyone will sort of play that way, and there won't be as much LAN experience, which actually you might even think is a little bit detrimental to the scene. Give it a few years and we might have a few players that really don't know how to function in these in-person scenarios, whether that's with other players or whether that is on a stage, as it were. So it is sort of a little bit sad to see, and I think that we need those events to also keep hardcore casuals, if that makes sense, like heavily involved and heavily interested in what's going on and in the scene, and you sort of get that taste, and that's sort of what the excitement's all about. You know, you want to go and play Sunday League or whatever, and, you know, do the move that Jack Grealish or whoever is doing in the Premier League. So I think that you're missing a lot of that now, because it's not just the Dreamhack that you say, there's quite a few that are dipping and just not able to put up the money and not getting the ticket sales. Like Insomnia, that was kind of their problem, is people just weren't going, you know, like, and competing. Like I casted one last September, would have been literally like a year ago, I think the weekend of, and there was like Face It level 2s playing, man, you know, in the semi-final. They just somehow managed to get through the groups because like no one was really paying any attention. So you would imagine with Jönköping, it's kind of gone the same way, where less and less people are sort of showing up and paying the money, or maybe you just got more spectators. You don't actually have people like competing deeply. So yeah, I never went to one, but you do hear about events like that and the big BYOCs, which it doesn't feel like they exist as much anymore. It's literally just like Epic Land is the only one that I can really think of as like a more heightened competition than just playing like your pugs or your Face It pugs or whatever, to get a taste of that high level and see if you can make it, you know. And there are a lot that go through that system where 17, 18, 19 years old, and it's like, do I actually have something here? Could I turn this into a career? and they sort of find out in places like that. I think that's the first, especially when you are younger, got to get your parents on side. You don't have your own money to like get across massive borders or have a chance to try out in a region that's a little bit lesser developed or whatever. You have to cut your teeth on these local lands, and they're just not as existent anymore, unfortunately.
It's definitely a shame. I mean, Jönköping was where they had the first and fourth majors for CS:GO, and so to kind of take away esports in general from a city that I don't really know if there's much else going on there, in all honesty. So the fact that it's like when you looked up esports or gaming pre 2010 in the 2000s, it kind of was like the first thing that came up. I remember even seeing images of it when I was just kind of starting to play Counter-Strike and everything, where it was just a bunch of sweaty guys and actually a few girls that were just kind of sitting around a bunch of CRTs. And I feel like DreamHack, WCG, and CPL were kind of the early names I heard when I was hearing about what this whole space was about, what LAN parties were, what tournaments were. And so no, as a whole, it's a shame, because I also want to say that one event that I'm glad still is running, obviously, is that the IEM Dallas is connected to DreamHack, and the fact that it's a stadium event with like 6,000 people capacity, generally gets actually fairly full, along with a DreamHack, was so interesting, because I would actually get to meet people who were at the DreamHack event, and then people would be like, oh yeah, and the Counter-Strike stuff, I've been watching that too, because you could go to the upper level for free and just be a spectator. And it's one of the reasons I thought Dallas was awesome. You got a bunch of just like cosplaying, Magic the Gathering playing kind of nerds that are just like also joining, and they're so interested in the spectacle. And I think that for Jönköping, I don't know exactly what the arena setup was, but just to speak on behalf of what Dallas did, where it was like a DreamHack event combined with an IEM event, it led to a lot of crossover fandom, and I'm sure many people there were getting their first taste of what it's like to be in an arena. And so for that to be unavailable is it's just a big shame, because you don't really get that tie-in to sort of the more just kind of like, for lack of a better word, it's just like the nerdier person, like the nerdier person that's attending for a different reason, going to that DreamHack, could have always watched high level Counter-Strike and just gotten to enjoy the spectacle. And now that's taken away from a big region which has historic roots in that space. So yeah, all in all, I think for history's sake, it's a bit sad.
Right, Skriv, what is your ugly point?
So my ugly point maybe feeds on from that quite nicely, to be fair. For me, it's kind of how stacked the calendar is looking next year, right? It obviously is something that is, on a first glance, kind of exciting and good to have all this competition kind of coming in. But I think that, I look at it from sort of the two perspectives that affect me. One as a spectator and enjoyer of the game, and then one a bit more from that punditry, a bit more from that also might be a little selfish here of like right on that level of having to pay attention to the top teams, but also really know my shit when it comes to the tier 2 teams that I'm commentating on most of the time. And there's just so much going on. I feel like it's going to be so difficult for people to like fully enjoy the entire circuit and get a full breadth of like, okay, does this event matter? Does it feed into this one? Are we going to value this win of this particular event over this one? Like, how do we equate where the teams are at? You might have like some team that's kind of in the middle, like some of the teams we mentioned, like an Eternal Fire. Maybe you might get a Spirit in a sense, like just trying to enter as many tournaments as possible. But it's like they're getting high placings at some of the events, like a Sky Esports or a Yala, not to take away from where they're at in the circuit. Or is there going to be an event in there that falls at a good time, but maybe all the teams skip it because they're sort of burnt out and whatnot? Are we going to miss out on the big teams that are having the goods run of forms and they're not playing off against each other because they're skipping events? Or, and it could get really weird in that sense, actually, and get really sort of tactical where it's like, oh, well, we don't want to go to this event XYZ. But in the same vein, I'm also not sure how it's going to work. And maybe this is something that can be raised a little bit, where you've got like PGL, where they're can teams turn it down, I guess, if they're getting invited, like, or will they hit like a really heavy ranking point deficiency or something like that if they turn down an event that they're actively invited to, like the PGL thing. So, but ultimately, I think that for me, it just feels like we're going back to that 2017, 2018, where it was almost tiring to watch, and you have so many teams that are just going to hit that burnout again and have a really good run. This is what they're capable of. And then the next event, they sort of go out 12th, and they just don't make any kind of a run. And I think that's something as well that feeds into where we're at as a scene competitively, and the fact that we've not had an era for a while, and we now might be in a position where we sort of miss out on era-based Counter-Strike, which could be a positive, could be a negative. I think it is a really nice narrative to have, but I think that is going to be missing because of where this circuit is going. And it is just, yes, there's a few events that directly clash, but ultimately there's not loads and loads that are overlapping, which I think maybe some people were worried about, that, are you going to watch Blast, ESL, or PGL this weekend? You got to pick one, and it's not quite the case, but they are close enough that I think teams will be skipping certain events where they can, just because of where it's at. But then again, we don't rightly know, is everyone just going to go to the PGL events because they're straight up ranked? I think that the system still also needs a bit of explaining in that sense.
I would just liken this to American football, because one of the best parts about American football, and even just having casual conversations with just people in my country about it, it's just that people use Red Zone, and people also watch the Monday night games, they watch the Thursday night game, they watch the Friday night game, and because there's such a finite schedule, you can actually get some pretty good takes from a lot of different people, because it's totally reasonable to have watched 50% of the games this week. And so that's why I think in a weird way, I think actually American football discourse is actually pretty strong, because people can watch like everything. You can pretty much see every team, every game if you really try to. It's just not possible with CS anymore. Coming next year, it is going to be impossible. And I feel like, unfortunately, it's a cool ugly point, because I think that actually that means that, like, as it stands right now for this year, I've watched a lot of CS. I've watched a ton of CS. I've probably watched, of the big tournaments, I don't know, something like 70% plus of all their games. I don't watch sometimes like the lower bracket, whatever, if there's a better upper bracket game going on, and I'm not always going to go back. But I watch a lot of it. But next year, oh my God, there's so much. And I don't even know, this is why sometimes narratives get a little bit weaker. And I actually will say this, I thought that sometimes when you're watching the random tournament in 2018 or something like that, sometimes the conversations about those games were really weak, because I just felt like is everybody really watching all 16 teams coming into this tournament? Probably not. And that's going to definitely be a hindrance to next year, when we're trying to make sense of and get conversations going about some of these teams that are ranked 15th to 25th. But it's as of this year, I've watched a lot of the 15th to 25th teams in multiple games, because they're playing at ESL Pro League. They might play it at an event that I've seen here and there, like an ESL Challenger, because there's nothing else always going on at these kinds of things. But next year, I don't know how actually people are going to keep up with watching teams outside of the top 10 regularly. That's the main thing. You can see them at the big events, at the major and everything like that. But when there's two tournaments running concurrently, and there might even be two streams at one of those tournaments, there's 3 tier 1 games going on at the exact same time. And so it's going to make the whole conversation a little bit of I think people are going to use generalizations a little bit more. I think people are going to just try to go use big narrative building tools, as opposed to having real conversations. Because Thorin and I can watch practically everything if we really want to at this point in time. But next year, I'm going to just say outright, it will be hard to do that. It's going to be really hard.
The problem is, there's a subtlety I feel like people missed on the old circuit, because it became a really hackneyed point that people always said. The most famous example was 2018 and 2019, when Astralis played Team Liquid in a million finals and all that jazz. And everyone was going, who wants to see them just play every 2 weeks? And what they always missed was this. It actually was never as extreme as that. What used to happen was this. Maybe let's say the top 5 to 6 teams did try to attend every big event. But even then, there'd be all those medium events, the equivalent of a Bet Boom Dacha now, where you wouldn't get the whole top 5 went. And in fact, because back in the day, this is a little bit before this time, but it's what this was a descendant of, Because back in the day, the main way you made money as a pro was win prize money. Actually, everyone was incentivized to look for an angle. So what you'd do is, just like now with BetBoom, right? If you're Spirit and Mouse, you should definitely attend because you're the only top teams attending. So if you get to attend, odds are you're both probably going to be in the final. One of you is going to win the event. It's just an easy sort of pick up of a bag, isn't it? Whereas that same money, if you're like at Blast Finals, is way harder to win. So I always used to think actually offset the overload of how many times you saw the best matches was if you ever go and look at those mega busy years, you do have tournaments between which help build the hype again. Because what you'll do is you'll have a tournament where like Virtus Pro played Astralis, but at the next tournament it's only Virtus Pro, or then one after that it's only Astralis, and then they go separate, beat up on like it's almost like MMA, they beat up on the cans to get back to contender status. Then you do the title fight at like Cologne or the Major or whatever it would be, right? The big problem you're going to have, and I won't make a big point out of this because I actually just refer people on this very channel. It's not this channel, it's the CS channel. It'll be on the League channel. On the other Last Free Nation channel, there is an episode of The Four Horsemen where we do it with Messi also from Complexity, who used to be an admin, so you understand circuit things a lot. And we basically go through there, and he knows more than me about the particulars of the rules, about some of the circuit things that are going to be bad next year. Like, here's two examples. One is that because the Valve ranking now, which is everything, remember, to get into majors, is based on prize money, that's where the PGL thing becomes a massive deal. Because if you don't know, PGL has basically been very cynical and just said, we're basically just going to put all of it into prize money. So we're just going to get, and if you don't know, that means one, it makes their tournaments incredibly important. So you'd be a fool to turn it down, Skriv, because you'll just lose your points you need to get to the major there. And then two, every player doesn't give a fuck about their org. So they're like, prize money? Sign me up for the $1 million. So every player is going to want to play there. Here's the problem. Even though you're going to have as many events as we used to have in 2018, in theory, every single top 10 team will attend all the big events. And it actually means there will be insane, like, it will just be like completely homogenous across the top events. It will just be the same event played out 15 times in the year. And in fact, there's even a detail. This is why I said I won't go into it. You can go watch that episode if you want to see this. There's even a detail that does the opposite of what you will all think is going to happen when you expand the scene. The best thing in theory about expanding the scene and having more lands, it actually has nothing to do with the top teams. It's supposed to be the tier 2 and tier 3 teams. They're supposed to go, well, brilliant, because when they don't attend one of these lands, I'm going to go and I'm going to win the 30k. And it's like, no. You might do that, but actually the circuit fucks you too. Because if you don't know, there's going to be something like equivalent to like an ELO system, basically. And the best example to give is this. Everyone who just saw make the semi-finals of Cologne under an ELO system and under a system like next year where the big events with all the monies where you go for the ranking points. One, if you're Saw and you just crack top 4, you'd be a fool to turn around and go to ESL Challenger next month. You can only lose. Every person you lose to, you lose the ELO points. There's no one good at that land to win any ELO points. And two, by attending events, you just immediately drop the ranking you gained from the Cologne win. So you're actually incentivized to not play. You're supposed to just sit on that ranking as long as you can, and you're only going to try and go to the tier 1 events anyway. So if you like only seeing tier 1, if you like Formula 1, basically, if you want the same people driving in the same way every single month, you'll get that. But I do think there are some edges people haven't noticed where basically it's not totally Valve's fault, but they haven't thought as usual about what the loopholes are, but what the fringe cases are. So I actually do think it'll be more negative than people think. Like when I heard some of that, you'll have to listen to Messi Oso's explanations. I did think they seemed like they could have some obvious negative aspects to it. Like I said about the example of the PGL one, I can tell you there's a lot of team orgs aren't happy about the idea. You're just putting millions in prize money and giving us nothing extra. Like brilliant. So it's just now my players are just hassling me to go to your fucking event. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Right.
Yeah, random shout out to Messioso. Like that guy actually pours through every single rule book and everything. Like I felt like my first impression of him was he's like kind of too cheeky for me on certain aspects. But then like after listening to stuff like that and just talking to him about the space, like he knows every book in and out, just front to back.
Put it this way, the joke is, every time I actually happen to accidentally turn on HLTV Confirmed, and I have to hear Professor or Striker go, like, not even as a rhetorical device, actually naively just saying out loud, like, I wonder what that means about that rule. I want to go, bro, you're a journalist, find out. Like, who else is supposed to find out for the community? You do it. Like, Messi also is the sort of person who doesn't just speculate. He actually looked in, like you say, what is the rules? How would this apply? What are the past precedents? So, no, he knows it. Because he's done every gig in the industry, he knows what he's talking about, basically.
Yeah, wasn't he an admin for a while?
He did it all. He worked to a Blast. He worked to the ESL. He was used to be a journalist back in the day. He's done it all. Yeah, he's one of those people who's seen all sides of the industry. Yeah.
Right.
What is your ugly point, Maui?
Yeah. This okay, so this obviously requires a huge disclaimer because I felt like something needed to be addressed about the whole Maniac accusations and everything like that. And I'm not this isn't about the right or wrong or guilty or innocent from my perspective whatsoever. I just need like to write one community narrative, and it's just that so frequently on a lot of the comment sections when all of this Maniac stuff was coming out was I think one of the most prevailing questions from fans was where is where is the evidence? Where is the evidence? And I feel like people are too used to living in this TMZ type world. Like we're gonna get like the Diddy camera or something like
Right.
that of what he did.
Okay.
Because but like that's through usually a leak, and usually someone faces almost like a jail time or a sentence for even leaking that at any
Oh,
point,
sure.
because the thing that people need to realize that regardless of who is right and wrong in the situation, I'm actually not taking an official stance on this podcast publicly about this kind of stuff. It's just simply that Blast has a right when they're conducting a private investigation to to respect the privacy of the accuser and the accused, and that publicly sharing that sort of evidence, whatever kind of evidence that they were fed at by the end of it, if they were to publicly share that, that would lead to them having there would be liability for the company for a variety of reasons that would just never be worth dealing with. Like them releasing a statement in itself is already probably more than they ever wanted to do, because I'm not gonna connect the dots for everybody, but I'm just gonna make this clear. Like this investigation seemed like it was already happening in the month leading up to that. That being said, the Hannah wanted to like get some more clarity and also bring it to the public eye, and so she like wanted to publish that statement publicly. And so like Blast already, by the way, like they didn't tell her anything, from at least from what she says, but Maniac was announced to work the fall groups. He didn't. Cadian took his spot. And no one there was no public information about that, and it never needed to be public. It never actually needed to be. It could have been a silent move away from Maniac, from Blast, and we would have never known about that because Blast did what a company should do that has liability, that could be sued, and didn't reveal publicly what was happening. The big disclaimer again is like I'm being hired by Blast, so I'm obviously my this is like maybe some people might be like this is lightly shilly, but it's also like this is just how companies work. If you have ever worked with a company that has HR, like this is how HR things are handled. If Joe Schmo at Pepsi at a Christmas party harasses Sally, then it's not up to Pepsi to publish on their public Twitter that there's any investigation going on. It's just that Joe would either get a huge slap on the wrist and a massive warning, or that they would just fire him. And then they aren't also in America even obliged if Joe Schmo then calls Coke to get a job, and Coke says, okay, we're going to call Pepsi because they're your last employer. Actually, to again distance yourself with liability reasons, Coke isn't, or Pepsi's not responsible at that point to say Joe Schmo did this at the winter party, which is why we're not working with him anymore. Like all of this stuff is like there's so many possible ways that you could find yourself liable as a company, and that the main thing is that like this is just a community response. Like why is there no public evidence? Because Blast would only hurt themselves by releasing that. Like that's basically it at this point. So I just wanted to make that abundantly clear, and I would just say obviously be careful in like responding to this point, because this is just how companies operate that have a bottom line and have lawyers attached to them and an HR department attached to them. I'm not making a claim one way or the other about who's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that what Blast did is how real companies handle these issues.
Yeah, I think it is just kind of a symptom of sort of what you say, like the instantaneous world that we kind of live in, where people very naively and very, unintelligently, I suppose, kind of look at it from a perspective of like, well, if there was evidence, it would be like instantly posted to corroborate everything. And it's like, that's just not how it works. And I think that as you kind of touch on, I've just sort of reread the statement and everything, that Hannah put things out to kind of shed that light because it looked like it wasn't going to be shed by anyone else, really. So, and I think
it
it's
looked
also
like she was trying to put the fire to Blast's feet, as it were, right? And
yeah, a
to do
little bit,
right?
right? That she went through the apparatus and wasn't really happy with the way that had turned out. And then also, I think that people really don't fathom or understand, and maybe because again they are a little more toxic, younger, whatever, how incredibly challenging like that first step is for someone that's been through something like, you know, any kind of level of like abuse. You know, it's really not an easy thing to do, and I think that that's why there is a lot of this siding with the accuser and whatnot, and that yes, you maybe have to play it carefully is where our arguments can kind of come in, but then you also see, you know, not 48 hours later the whole thing's sort of done. So really, really difficult kind of level, I think, to hit. And yeah, just it felt so strange, like community wise, why there was so many kind of people as well, I think is the big thing that came out for my money. I don't really have too much to add on top of what Maui said, but just to kind of corroborate that it shouldn't have to go that way, you know, like it's been put into the open court, as it were, for kind of a reason. And then you let the open court sort of work through it, and it did ultimately, you know, and we didn't need, like, what sort of, I think is the kind of question as well around it is like, what kind of evidence would they want? There were still people towards the end of all this that were asking like to see hard evidence, and it's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? I remember as well, maybe a little tidbit here and whatnot. I got in, and one of the first things they said to me at the after party, didn't see anything that happened, right? One of the first things they said to me was no pictures, no cameras. And I was like, all right, fair enough. You know, because there were people there that wouldn't want those kinds of, you know, things like...
By the way, that's a totally non-sinister
like
reason.
Whatever,
there's an obvious reason why you don't want that. Who the fuck wants to be getting drunk and have someone taking pictures constantly of you, like with a flash on? Like, that's actually a totally standard thing to expect, Skriv. Yeah. In fact, I'll even say, I even know talent that sometimes when fans come up when they're drunk and have to go like, no pictures, mate. Like, I'm not right now. Like, I'm not the right time for that. It's not appropriate, is it? So that's not even a sinister thing. You're right. That's just almost like the sort of unspoken rule, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think they just kind of, because I was a little bit like in my position, I'm not as well known. I can't just kind of, you know, walk in and be like, oh, it's that guy or whatever. But there were there were players and stuff there, you know what I mean? And I think those especially maybe wouldn't want to be there or be seen or be talked or whatever, given the way they may have just performed at the event kind of thing or whatever it might be, you know? So I think that it just comes at like a really ridiculous angle. Like you say, that it is also something that is expected, that it's a little bit taboo to kind of go in there and, you know, whatever. I'm not going to play on that, but yeah, I think that it just felt very, very strange from like some members of the community. And you see as well, it's like maybe not members of the community, but people sort of posting about it, and then it would really sort of go off. And as I say, there were still people like asking towards the end, so a little bit of an ill point in a way, and yeah, definitely ugly for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm only going to talk about this through the abstract of like the concept Maui's talking about of what when people demand evidence or what they think is even possible legally. I mean, there's an obvious proxy I'll even do it through, which I'll mainly actually discuss a different case that was a few months ago, which was obviously that famous Dr. Disrespect thing that came out and all the thing where people say, why didn't the people who said they had the evidence come out with it, and why didn't they leak it, and why didn't they show the screenshots, and can I see the conversations? So I'll put that out there, because by the way, one thing I will never ever do is think about the fact that all the content I produce, except my Substack, is free anyway. No one pays 1 cent for this. You aren't the customer. By the way, if you're the person watching this video, the customer technically is whoever the sponsor is. You're actually just someone who gets to enjoy the content for free. You're a weird, like, middle party in this whole equation. So I'm not a jukebox. You are not obliged to know. I am not obliged to tell you what I think about that topic. In fact, I even think that is an indictment of how sick society is, that you actually want to, like, almost like a type of pornography, claw over like all the details. Like, oh, well, did you know? And what did you know? Did you? And what did they say? And why haven't you said this? And say the thing I want you to say. It's like, nah, I don't even like the fact this topic's even on this show, by the way. What's it got to do with Counter-Strike? Not a single thing. This was nothing, not a single thing happened in a Counter-Strike server or had to do with the Counter-Strike match or to do with teams or the way they play against each other. It's just drama. Now, for the people involved, it's very serious drama. That's why, by the way, in my opinion, this is a matter for, yes, the police. This is a matter for tournament organisers. I think you could say there's a mixture of, depends what the role of the person being the victim here is, but potentially this could be a player safety issue, this could be a talent issue, it could just be a fan issue, people attending the events. I think that's why there is a serious reason why tournament organisers do have some level of liability if they arrange a party, if they arrange an event. Obviously, yes, it does matter who they hire, not just for what they do on the mic or in the server. So I would just say this, if someone goes back, the reason why this topic is going to be a lot easier if you talk about the Dr. Disrespect story is, I think Richard Lewis on his YouTube channel even has a video, whenever that was it a month ago or 2 months ago, I forget how recently it was. Let's say it was 2 months ago. On Richard Lewis's YouTube channel, there's a video where I think he talks to Slasher and they talk about this exact topic, where he basically explains that, like, you don't even get it, guys. It's hard enough sometimes when there's just like corporate corruption to show like actual leaked documents and redacted things. If you want to make any kind of like a sexual harassment claim, you have to basically meet the highest possible legal standards of like evidence, etc., to be able to put anything out there, because otherwise you could be absolutely destroyed on a million fronts. Like, this isn't one of those ones, this is where I'm going to make a key point here, where even if spiritually you are right, if you don't have all the evidence and all your fucking sort of I's dotted and your T's crossed, you are going to be in so fucking deep shit. And so if people don't know, that's why in the Dr. Disrespect case, you will never see those conversations. You will never see the Twitch whispers. You will never even get to know the identity of the person or what happened. And it's with good reason. And I'll quickly just explain something that people might not get here, which is, when it comes to that sort of information, what you will be sued for is called defamation. And it actually depends whether you're in the UK or the USA. I don't know where these cases would be tried. It can be different depending on which it is. Like, I'll give you an example. I think off the top of my head, it's something weird. Like in America, the person making the claim has to like prove it's true. Whereas in the UK, it's like the other way around. Like the person who's claimed from has to like prove it wasn't the case. And so basically, however it works, I believe the way in the UK that's different is, in the UK, basically, you can say something that is true, but because it then does have the effect of making the person not get work, you can still be sued by them. You've essentially, even though it's true what you published, you ruined their rep. And in a case like this, by the way, Dr. Disrespect or Maniac, you would literally be denying them work if what they found was released, then stop them getting gigs. And they could very easily prove that, by the way. So depending on which country that's even tried in, you could actually lose, even though you publish real evidence that the person really did do a crime. So it's not as simple as people think. And that's why I'll loop it back into the fan expectation. This is where you've watched too many movies and too many TV shows. What in reality you're saying, if I was to boil it down, is this. You personally, Joe Blogs, Joe Billy Nobody, who has no right to any information about any of this matter, thinks, but I want to know who the one who is bad is. So you think like we should bring the evidence to you. You get to watch it and go, well, here's what I think. I think this person's right or wrong. You don't, not only are you not the person who has that like actual like right, but literally no one owes you that. Nobody at all. In fact, here's the real black pill for you. You will never know in any of these cases who is actually totally right and totally wrong. You'll never see hard evidence. You weren't there. You will only ever be able to go off eyewitness testimony, basically. And at that point in time, you're just doing your own character evaluation of, do I believe this person? Does it sound plausible? What's the preponderance of evidence? Terms like that, right? Things like that. So at that point in time, look, that's actually enough, by the way. Here's what people don't get as well. There's a notion, Skriv, that like, but until we have it, how can we really decide? No, that's actually the point. One, if it's about legal matters, the police can take care of that. That's literally their job, not ours. That's not even Blast's job or any TO's job. Two, if you want to do the angle of should the TO employ the person anymore, well, actually for that one, you never needed hard evidence. You never even needed it to be true. You can choose, by the way, who you associate with and who you on a freelance contract base hire to do your events. So by the way, forget even if someone did or didn't do a crime. If you just heard someone's an arsehole and everyone doesn't like him, that's a reason enough to not hire him to your event. You can do that tomorrow. That's why actually the main issue here is just, does the TO cover the story up, or do they take action if they think something's been done? So I actually think in that sense, hasn't that all pretty much resolved itself? I think at this point, pretty much all ends are squared away. You might be sat at home going, but I want to know. You will never know, and you have to understand and accept that that is literally the default state. You will never get closure ever on this topic. The only people who hopefully do get closure are the people who are either the accused or the accused, depending on which way it plays out. And that's, again, again, not something where we're going to be the ones looking at what the information is. We're only ever going to hear third hand, this person did or didn't do it, or this, but here's the ruling. We're never going to actually even know the criteria, all the details. I will just say one last thing, and this is a general point for anyone in the future who might be in this situation. The one area I would give a piece of advice goes like this. Because I saw people that were trying to make it like you can only sort of pursue these matters officially. No. One of the things that, as you said, Skriv, with the way this played out, one of the motivating factors does seem to be when someone went public with it, right? You don't have to only go and lodge an official complaint with the police or a TO, or publicly say what happened. There's a third option that was there the whole time, and that's what alarms me about this case. The third option is, if behind the scenes you're not getting any traction and you can't get the right people to listen to you, the third option is already go to journalists. If you go to journalists and you have 2-3 people and you have a bunch of stories and any kind of evidence, screenshots, timestamps, you have any of these things, that means at a minimum, now look, you are playing with fire here, you better know your story, it better all be legit. But essentially, that means even if the person doesn't get fired, doesn't get any legal action, you can sort of get the real truth out there. You can still do that. That's always a mechanism of journalism that is actually, I think, a social good, is the idea that, like, sometimes people do corporate corruption and get away with it, or they have some legal loophole, but if you know that they did it, it helps the wider community. People know not to hire that person and work with that person. I would just say that last point, which is don't ever underestimate that detail. By the way, to say for pro players, if you want to make a totally abstract thing, nothing to do with this case, if you're a pro player, you're being fucked over and you can't complain to Valve, or you go to a journalist, show them all the evidence, get people that corroborate your story, and again, you can sometimes sort of pull the levers of power, as it were, a little bit via social influence. You can actually have an impact that way. So I would just say on the last one, that's the thing I hope we level up as a community. It's like there was also ways the word could have gotten out there without it having to go through these means and this massive social media drama like this. So I hope in the future people also consider reach out to, by the way, some of the people who reported on this story, they've shown they've got a precedent, they'll do the story. So I would say you reach out to these people proudly. By the way, as far as I know, Richard Lewis always has open DMs on Twitter. You can always DM him. He reads them all, even all the stupid ones. So if anyone actually is in real need of help, I guarantee you he will reply and he will probably do the best that he can. So that's my last one on that one. Right. My point is the last ugly point. So this is actually going to be, I'm going to do like the Faze one. It's going to be more turning this back on you, and I want to see what you think. Because I actually think the hardest team in Counter-Strike to evaluate is NAVI. So my ugly point is this. It's NAVI's firepower for the last few months. Because the reason why it's ugly, here's the thing, Skriv, you look it up, it's going to look awesome. It looks fucking sick. Like, basically, if you don't know, guys, Navi's firepower profile for the last few months is what we all think of as mouse. Like, they're just fucking loaded. Everyone's really good. And everyone except the IGL sort of, like, actually frags out above the level you'd expect for their role. And you look and you go, bro, isn't this going to be like mouse? Aren't like 3 or 4 of these players going to be top 20 this year in HLTV? So the reason why it's ugly is this. Do people actually believe it's going to hold? Is this real? Are these 4 players? Are Blade and XCB such geniuses? It turns out their team is the only team in the history of Counter-Strike that takes like 6 months to come online. But then when it comes online, they're just amazing. And now they are just the best team and they're going to just win out. I want to put it to you guys. What do you think? Because the problem is, that could be the case. Like, maybe they're the first ones to ever do it. Blade's a genius. Maybe he's figured it out. But I'll just say, in history, I've never seen something like this happen. Like, a 6 month later glow up of the entire squad. Everyone looks better. And then it holds for, 4 months more. So I want to know where you guys are at. Who is it legit? Who are the legit people? Who do you think might be overinflated? What do you think of this? What do you think of Navi's firepower? Is it real?
I'd probably side on the side of no, to be honest, just because I think that there have been a few kind of inconsistencies. You know what I mean? They've been in this sort of position over the year, as it were, where like once one player drops off, another one really picks up. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem to have too much sense to it, and it seems like they're maybe just having players hit their form or hit their year peak, as it were, or maybe even career peak at the right time, if that makes sense. You know, it's Immer at the moment. I think JL's had a bit of a drop-off, bits fitting in sort of more as that kind of role player, as it were. And I think that ultimately they've not hit the level where it makes sense, where there is sort of that structure to it behind the scenes. It also might come from the fact that they have just such a heavy playbook that it doesn't necessarily need a particular player to do well. It just needs someone to do well within what they've called, because it is so deep that it will find success just so long as like shots are being hit. So I don't know, man. I think that eventually they'll get kind of figured out. They'll sort of drop off, and there won't be as much in them. I think that there's a couple, like Immer is one where maybe we're seeing him get back to that, Paris Major form. But I don't know where it's come from. It just seems to have shifted out of nowhere. And then Wonderful, I feel like started off really well in this team and was turning a lot of heads, but then recently just hasn't been needed as much, but also isn't putting up numbers. So they're a really weird sort of team in that sense. I just think that, I'm not really on the side that it is going to keep up, because I think that once they sort of get figured out, I think we just have a few players here that play the game in a pretty particular way, like a pretty idiosyncratic kind of way. And I don't know that fundamentally they have like the soundest team, if that makes sense.
I feel like the firepower can keep up as long as Blade is putting in all the work that he has been putting in along with Alexi B. Because still to this day, when I watch Navi games, I still think, I know people are like wishy-washy on the term. Like Sponge said he didn't want to call them the best T-side team. Yanko yesterday on the cast said like they might be the best T-side team. They're the best T-side team for me. Like they're the best T-side team because they don't have the players that Vitality has. Like I'd say those are 1A, 1B with the best T-sides, but it's just that I would say the calling is so much better. That's why I give them that sticker of like the best T-side team today. And that's kind of like, in a way, the firepower to me comes from the fact that they're putting themselves in such winning positions. It's one of those kind of things where it's like, I almost, probably lightly undervalue how good all the individuals were on that Legacy or the Legendary Astralis lineup because they were such a good unit. So it kind of could be any of the players that pop off map to map. And so when it comes to like some of the upticks in performance, such as Ema's, I feel like Ema in particular has just kind of slowed himself down a little bit. I feel like when he was actually on Gamer Legion, he had to do a lot more heavy lifting. And I think that he thought that he had to do more heavy lifting when he first was playing with Navi. And so he was actually playing a little too fast. And now I feel like he's just putting so much pressure by staying alive in these points that he's able to find, because his team Navi take insanely good map control, and they usually are slotting Ema into that spot that now puts pressure on the opposing team. And before, he would just peak too early. Like, he just died too fast, and it would actually kind of mess up the round a little bit, because all of this utility and time you spent to put him there kind of goes to waste because he just dies too quickly. And now I just think he kind of like jiggles it out a little bit, kind of waits. The other team knows that he's there, and now he's just this thorn in their side, as opposed to before where he was like, I like just thought like, okay, now I'm here, I got to kill everybody. So I think he's understood how the systems should be played, and I think he's benefiting because of that. I think that Bit has other than that first map of the Cologne Grand Finals, he's been really good overall. I feel like I rarely see him just fall down. He's also become kind of a noob stomper. Like, anytime they're playing a bad team, I feel like Bit's just good for 25 kills or something like that. So he's got firepower for sure. I feel like one thing that is a little bit that is so different about Navi is that despite the fact that they have a very flashy Opera and Wonderful, he still just kind of is more of a turret to me, as opposed to a guy that's calling his own number nearly as much. And I feel like, I don't know where these kind of messages come out, or where they've said this in interviews, but it seems like Wonderful is not the most talkative guy, and he just doesn't know how to get himself involved. And I still think that's probably hurting his potential. But I also sometimes just see him miss the easiest shots in like a simple position too. So I don't know, the whole question of like, is their firepower going to keep up? It's just that to me, the firepower is so deeply intertwined with how good the tactics are being pulled off and how much they're upsetting the timings of the opposing teams. Because still I'm still seeing teams just get caught off by Bit running through a smoke in Palace at ESL Pro League. It's like he's still just walking through Palace whenever he feels like, and it's like, is he reinventing himself, or is he always going to catch people looking the wrong way? Like, I don't know if like you need firepower if they're always creating this amount of misdirection that has Bit benefiting because of it. So it's a tough question overall, and like I don't know, like I think in reality, like HLTV is going to say all 4 of their players not named Alexi B are going to make the top 20 this year. Is that realistic? Like, are these players actually that good? different question because I think that the system that Alexi and Blade created is giving them all a 0.07 rating boost than what they would have on any other team in the space.